back if you want to sit on the side pews. Thanks for everybody who came out, and thanks especially to the tour being here. We're thrilled to have them here. They were at 100 Mile already, and we saw them last night in Quesnel, and it was powerful. It was great. It was a good crowd, and everybody was pretty pumped. We're all pretty pumped about the truckers, the convoy, and so it's. There's a real momentum going on right now in the land, and everybody's encouraged. And we need encouragement because our government has been discouraging us for a long time. So that's great to have. And these guys will encourage you with what they have to share as well. The truth is always encouraging. Amen? Yeah. Okay, so just two things. Bathrooms are downstairs. I think everybody knows. And we are going to have an opening prayer. And then we're going to sing O Canada, and then we'll turn it over to our esteemed colleagues. So everybody in the medical community has usually heard about the GPs, but we have the GDs, the great doctors. And we want to begin with giving thanks to God for you guys and for everybody being here tonight and for the convoy on its way to Ottawa to set things straight. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to bless you and thank you so much for the encouragement that you have brought to the hearts of Canadians and to us here tonight. For those here on the stage, we thank you for those in their pursuit in this crusade to speak the truth that has been suppressed and denied, that everybody should have a right to hear. So we thank you that they're out doing that, and we thank you that they're here tonight to share. We pray your blessing upon them, O Lord, as much as we pray for your blessing on the truckers as they head to Ottawa, Lord. We pray for that momentum to make big changes here, to recover our nation, that we can all return to the Canada that we all grew up and loved. And so we just ask, O Lord, your blessing there. And we want to praise you for the encouragement that you bring to us in the gospel and in the truth that is shared. And so we pray your blessing on that tonight, as that is shared with the truth, as much as understanding that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and in him is salvation. So we bless you and praise you in his name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to sing O Canada, and I was going to defer to the good doctor, the great doctor. Help me. Okay. O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Doctors on tour, on the road, and the Educate Before You Vaccinate to the communities throughout British Columbia. When we started this, little did we know that we would still be doing this. We thought we'd go to 3 or 4 communities on the island, get a few great videos that people could send out across the country, and we would be done. But request after request after request started flowing in, and the first tour ended up being a little longer than we thought. Everybody still has real jobs on top of all of these events. So we went back home for a few days, regrouped, and hit this tour. And we've been up to Smithers, Terrace, 100 Mile House, Quesnel, and places in between. We still have Kamloops on our way back, which, again, you know, these events just keep popping up. They're not necessarily scheduled when we start out, so it's a little bit like where we will end up. We never know. But it is always been just our privilege to meet so many amazing people as we have traveled this province. So after this tour, we're home again for a few more days, and then we're off to the Kootenays. They are beckoning us to Ontario. They actually wanted us to fly in for the truckers on Saturday. We said, no, we have a date with Kamloops. We are dedicated to this province, okay? So we have a lot to go through, so this is how the evening will come. I want you to first help me welcome the three doctors, Dr. Stephen Maltos, Dr. Rachel Maurice, Dr. Tara Cox. They have been inspirations in this province, and you will hear their stories tonight about how they all started the trouble. If anybody really wants to know who the real troublemakers are in the province, not saying too much, but you will find out. I can also tell you that there are more and more doctors. There are so many 8,000 healthcare professionals that are starting to speak up and realizing that if we don't say now is enough, we're done, what's to come we don't want to see. So I'm going to speak a little bit later about that, but without further ado, let's listen to Dr. Rachel Maurice. See if we can get it without too much. There. Okay? Don't comply, Rachel. Don't comply.
So my name's Rachel Maurice. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I've been practicing in Kamloops for almost 17 years now, originally from Vancouver. When all of this started in March,
Can someone turn the sound up, or can it be done by the?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can hear right at the back.
Can people hear at the back? Can you guys hear back there?
It's up to God. to turn
It's
it up.
quiet. Yeah, you want it up, okay.
closer. Is that?
When you started pointing, I thought we were going to need a divine intervention.
It's ask and you shall receive, Stephen, right?
Is that better?
Say a few words.
Is that louder?
Can you people hear way at the back? Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Yeah, the other microphone, I had to stick it in my mouth, basically. Yeah, so I'm going to share sort of how things were perceived and received for me in all of this. When this all went down in March of 2020, it was pretty scary for us in the hospital. So I've got an in-hospital perspective here. And being an anesthesiologist, we intubate people for operations for just about every single operation. So we're right in people's faces, getting breathing tubes down their throats. So with this being a respiratory virus, we all kind of saw what was going on being propagated through the televisions and everywhere else in the world, seeing people dropping on the streets and hospitals filling up and everyone looking like their hazmat suits in hospitals like in Italy and so on. So it was pretty frightening. Our group really wanted to get all of the proper personal protective equipment to make sure that we were protected so that we could actually help other people as well. So right off the bat, I was pretty scared, but that's what I was trained to do, and so this is what we're going to do. And they actually made, in our hospital, they made our team the intubating team. So we were the ones who would be called for all the intubations in the hospital, which wasn't the way it was before. When codes were called, they had different, the ICU team would go and do that, but they figured because this is something that we do on a regular basis, and that's our area of expertise, they just wanted it to be done as efficiently as possible and make sure that we can keep everyone as safe as possible. So we had that set in place, and It seemed that when I was on call for intubating, there didn't seem to be a whole lot going on, and I thought, well, maybe that's just my good luck. I didn't have to do a lot. But then I started asking other people how their nights were, and it seemed to be a lot slower than what we were seeing in other parts of the world. And so I thought maybe Kamloops was a smaller hospital, even though we are a regional trauma center. I thought maybe it just happened to bypass us, or I don't know. So I started questioning. I started calling some friends in other places in Canada who I'd done residency with, and we all kind of dispersed and asking how things were in their hospitals and whether it was just different for us. And it seemed to be that most places really were clearing out the hospital as much as they could to be able to accommodate the waves that we were being told were going to happen. And so most people that I was talking to said that things were pretty slow, and emergency rooms were slow, and I mean, I know people didn't want to go into the hospital, but just in case, it seemed like things weren't happening the way we were being told. And so I come from a household where my mom, she's a retired lawyer, but she basically raised me to question absolutely everything. And so I just started thinking, I'm just going to sit back and we'll see what happens. And the more that would come to light, the more things didn't really make sense for me. And so I started questioning, like I thought other people I was working with who were educated and saw what I saw, started asking questions in the operating room of my colleagues, nurses, surgeons, other assists, and so on. And people were just really afraid, and I think they weren't paying too much attention. But I started probing a little bit more and asking questions that got me hauled into the chief of staff's office, basically saying that I can't be asking questions. I shouldn't be talking about things at work. And I kind of looked at him, and he was also a physician and had that administrative role as well. And I thought, well, people are asking me questions, and I'm asking questions, and what's wrong with that? And he said, just don't do it in the hospital. Basically, was the bottom line. And I can tell you the kind of questions I was asking were, for example, sitting around with a couple of nurses waiting for a patient to wake up, and they were panicking about the cases. The cases are going up. The cases are going up. And I'm like, just take a deep breath. I'm like, so do you know what that means? Cases. And they kind of looked at me, and I said, well, are the people sick, or is it a positive test? And again, they kind of looked at me going, well, I didn't really think about that. And I'm like, okay, so if it's a positive test, that actually the PCR test doesn't actually test for any viral particles, or it's they don't actually test for like virus. They actually test for just pieces of genetic fragment. And they kind of looked at me, and I said, so the other thing is, have you heard of a CT, the cycle threshold, and how you actually measure the test? And they hadn't known about it, and I just kind of gave a little bit of information, and they came to their own conclusions as I kind of fed them information for them to realize what was going on. And so that was what I was told not to talk about in the operating room, in the hospital. So anyways, when that also made me even more suspicious when I'm being told not to talk about things that I thought that's what I've been doing for the last however many years I've been in medical school residency and practicing. And the other thing was, I wanted to bring up something about sort of fear and how physicians are looked upon for information in this, even if it's not necessarily their area of expertise, or for that matter, other healthcare workers, because we do have at least some kind of baseline education in it. And I was asking, as more and more information would come to light that I was looking for, as opposed to it just coming to me, I was asking my colleagues to see where they were at in terms of whether they were finding out information. And my colleagues, I know that they're busy. They've got their own lives, their specific specialty, to learn about, and they've got kids, and they're running around and trying to feed them in daycare and everything like that. And so questions I was asking to me were pretty simple, but it was new information that I was learning about that I was never taught. And so I wanted to see what other people, what information they had, and people didn't know about VAERS. I had never learned about it until all of this started. You know, some other pieces of information that were coming out, there just seemed to be a disconnect, but I think a lot of it was they're so used to outsourcing information because our type of medicine has become fragmented in the sense that there's so many different specialties and subspecialties, and everybody gets so narrowly focused in their area, and then they just rely on the experts in their area to give them the proper information. So they just, like we're taught in medical school, you just believe what you're taught, and then that's how you practice afterwards. So a lot of people who, specialists who are not necessarily virologists or epidemiologists, when they give information, they aren't necessarily giving you the information that they have gone and done the research for. They're just giving the information that they are being told from, you know, the alphabet agencies that we get our protocols from. So I just wanted to pass that little piece of information along, because I know, well, I can come back to that. So moving along in time, I was kind of gathering information for myself, as I do, and I was sitting back and watching things unfold. And then it came to about May, June of 2021, when they authorized the vaccine for 12-plus-year-olds. And that's when it really hit me that I had to get off my butt and do something, because I've got 2 teenage kids, and I was not going to let them come near my kids. So again, that was the first time that I learned in all of these years that the Infants Act in BC actually applied to vaccinations, and my kids could go get the shots without my consent, without my permission. They could even go and get it, and the information didn't even need to be disclosed to me. Like, they basically could go and the adults giving the shot tell them that they don't have to give the information to me. So can you imagine, you know, kids coming home having a reaction and you have no idea what's going on. So the best thing for me that I could do, and I've always done with my kids, is to arm them with as much information as possible. And always have an open dialogue with my kids, so they knew that I was learning about things that I didn't necessarily know before, and realizing that there was a lot of omission in our teaching and a lot of intentional information that was taught to us as well. So my kids have always been very open in receiving information, but I've also taught them to challenge me as well and question me. And so, you know, they're getting information from a lot of different places, but they also know that what their mom is like. So, so as much as we all know as adults, we can see around us the pressures and the coercion and the manipulation and the guilt tripping among families and friends and coworkers and so on, that the propaganda that keeps coming out to basically, you know, you're going to kill a family member, friends, or grandma, or whatever, you know, that's bad enough for the adults, but the kids, it's 1,000-fold when you're doing that to the children. And the pressure's out there for them to just comply, you know, to be able to do their sports, to be able to see their friends, to go to movies, to, you know, all the things that kids want to do. Long story short, the pressure ended up being too much, and both my kids ended up getting the shots, which left me feeling like I didn't do my job as a parent, which was heartbreaking for me. And I sat and wallowed in that for a bit, thinking I didn't really know. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I just felt like I didn't know how to kind of go on, thinking, what if I lose my children? Because, you know, we see what's going on in the world now with adverse reactions and deaths. I had a lot of support, and I had great friends and family as well. And so I kind of picked myself up and knew I had to move forward, and knew that that wasn't going to be the end. 2 shots was not going to be the end of it. So I had to gently continue to feed my kids information about what was going on. And then this opportunity came up to speak, and I have to tell you, my initial reaction to it was fear. I'm not comfortable public speaking to begin with, but then watching what's happening around the world with other scientists and physicians, and you know, a perfect example, these two here, is when you go public and you speak something that's different from what's being the narrative that's out there. It doesn't matter what you're saying, you're going to get attacked, judged, vilified, ridiculed, you know, looking into your license and so on. You can get your livelihood taken away. But you know, when I look back on it and I think, well, you know, my kids are the most important thing to me. And you know, when I became a mom, they were my priority. And you know, I went through a pretty horrific and long, arduous divorce process. And I made an enormous number of decisions based on fear, and I wasn't thinking, I didn't have any blood flow going to the thinking part of my brain, and I was exhausted from that. And I know what it feels like to live in fear and make decisions in fear and feel like that's kind of pulling at you every single day, and you just want a little bit of peace in your life, you know, so you end up kind of making choices that maybe you otherwise wouldn't have if you were thinking clearly. And so, you know, that's happening a lot today. But I felt I didn't, for a while now though, a couple of years at least, I didn't want to be making any more decisions based on fear, and it's just so clear in this world today that so many people are making decisions based on fear, and it's understandable. It is understandable, but at the same time, we have to be able to try to get ourselves out of that. And for me, I thought this is more important. My kids are more important. Everybody's children are more important. Adults can make their own decisions, and their brains are fully formed, and you know, maybe they're not thinking clearly, but kids are not, and kids need to be protected. And that's our job, and that's my job. So I felt that I needed to speak out regardless of the consequences. And it has impacted me, and you know, a little bit with my kids as well, but at the same time, you know, they'll see that in the future, and they know what's going on now, and you know, even with the truckers, that whole kind of the convoy, I think everyone sees Canada around the world as being sort of peaceful and, you know, polite and just letting things slide, and not like, you know, our neighbors to the south. And it's kind of been, in a sense, disheartening to not see people kind of rise up, and then to have this happen is just, it really is, it makes us feel proud to be Canadian, right? Like, people are finding this. Just to kind of go back a little bit to that, speaking on fear, one thing, as I was driving up here today from Kamloops, it's about a 3-hour drive, and normally when I've got some time and I'm by myself, I've got something playing to get information, and I'm plugged in, and I'm constantly trying to learn and figure out what's happening and listen to what's happening, because of things seem to be changing on a regular basis. But I decided that I was actually just going to sit in quietude and give myself space to breathe, and just, you know, take in the road, the nature, the drive, being by myself. And I feel that to be able to get to a place of clarity and be able to think properly and get away from that fear that we are just bombarded with. And, you know, even though we are getting information, there is still, you know, people are calling it fear porn, fear mongering, and so on. And it seems to be coming at us from all angles. And it's hard to get away from and especially when you want to be informed. But I think it's really, really important for us, and I have to force myself to do it, so I did today. But it's important for us to really disconnect from that a little bit, because I think that's the only way we can go inward, and that's really where our peace can come from, and we can listen to our intuition and listen to our hearts and listen to what we need without getting the pressure from people outside telling us what we should be doing. Because we can only make those decisions what's right for us from ourselves and from within, because no one else can tell us what's best for us, right? Each individual knows what's best for them, regardless of, I keep saying, the best thing to do is go get a shot. So I was thinking about one of the questions that I hear a lot is, why are there so few physicians who are countering the narrative? And why should I believe what you're saying? Probably from people outside of this room, but why should we believe what you're saying when there's so few of you and everybody else in the majority is just, basically saying the same thing that the narrative is telling us? And I believe that a lot of it comes back to the fact that everyone's human. We are human. It doesn't matter what you do, what education you have. And when you're in a state of fear, like I was saying earlier, I do know wholeheartedly what that feels like. You are not thinking, and you outsource your decision making. It's just something you do, and then when you get to a point where you've had enough and you just want a little bit of peace in your life, you just do what you make the decision to do something to get that peace. And I think that's where a lot of people are at now, or that they have been in where they are now. And so I don't know if these guys have any other ideas about our positions, but there's a little bit of hope, because we do have groups that are forming, physician groups that are forming that can see what's going on. But again, some of them are still working, and they're afraid of reprisal for speaking out and getting licenses investigated and so on. And so anyways, I just wanted to leave you with a little bit of hope that there are other people waking up, other physicians, other scientists.
While they're getting organized, for those of you that don't have seats, there are seats down the sides at the front if anybody wants an extra seat.
Yeah, go ahead and scoot down in. Okay, and I agree with Dr. Maurice. Let's give her another round of applause. While there seems to be so much loss around, there is also so much hope. And I can tell you, at every event that we have gone to, filled to capacity just like this, everywhere we go, there are things that happen that we weren't expecting when we first started out on the tour. People would just look around and go, I didn't know there were so many of us, right? And it gave them hope. It told them they weren't the only one. We had people in tears because this was the first time they had come together in big gatherings for almost 2 years, right? It was like this new awakening. And people became encouraged. And I can tell you there is a lot to be encouraged about. People are saying enough is enough. The lunacy ends now. We have so many groups rising up, and we have the privilege of working with all the leadership groups across the country. We will be coming back into this area for the Glorious and Free Tour, where we are going to be liberating communities as we come along. Children will be unmasked, businesses will open. If they can't look around now and see that this experiment has failed, I don't know what will convince them. But for logically inclined thinking people, great Canadians, we are going to say, this lunacy ends now. bring tears of joy and happiness, but sadly, there's been a lot of tears of pain and suffering. Story after story after story, adverse reactions, heart problems, death. A father of 2 wanting to travel to Mexico, gets the jab, 2 days later falls dead, has a heart attack. Today even, we're in the bus coming up here and I get an emergency email. Carrie, 13-year-old, both shots, in hospital, 9 doctors, nobody will talk to her about adverse reactions. Okay, she can't walk. So what do? They send her to a psychiatrist. They release her. She's in the truck talking to her friends because she can't get out of the truck because she can't walk. Well, last night her parents had to take her to the hospital because she had a full-blown seizure. So as we sit here tonight, she's in Chilliwack Hospital. Now there's 11 doctors. The family's starting to record things. So they say to the doctors, we want to find out if this has anything to do with the vaccination. The doctor and the internist say, we'll be right back. And they leave. They never come back. This is happening across this province. This is being played out. When we asked the family friend for an update who's in contact with us, we said, did this 13-year-old get her shot on her own? What was the story? No, this is a pro-vax family. But you know what? Guess who else had to go to the hospital? The mother and the sister. This family is not so pro-vax anymore, you guys. There are serious things happening here, and they are not being reported. We deserve the truth. You know, we all know this is an experiment. Tell us what's going on. But they're not even looking for the truth. They have such tunnel vision that the vaccination program will solve all our problems. We know this isn't about our health and well-being anymore. And we'll talk a little bit later about what is going on and what we, the people, can do to stop this lunacy. But before I get on that roll, because I can really rock and roll on that one, we are going to hear from Dr. Stephen Malthouse, who's going to give you the science as to why this experiment is failing and never needed to begin in the first place. We need to protect our kids. Yeah, do you want that up here?
He's telling me to move over to this side. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. I'm Dr. Stephen Malthouse. I'm a family doctor. I've been in practice for 43 years here in British Columbia. And way back in 2020, in the beginning of that year, we were aware that something was coming our way. We were preparing ourselves for that. And over the last 2 years, you can see that many things have happened, right? We've gone down a long road, quite a dark road, actually. When they started rolling things out for the kids, for the 5 to 11-year-olds, that's where we felt we had to come to your communities and speak to you personally. We had to see you face to face and let you see us. We've done our homework unlike many of the doctors you know. Doctors, as Dr. Maurice said, they're very busy, and the revolving door of the medical clinic often doesn't allow them enough time to do their own research. So what they do is they rely upon the experts. In the last 2 years, what we discovered is the experts have been lying to us. And they're using the media as a propaganda machine. So there's only one side of the story, and everything else is censored. If any doctor speaks out, then the college goes after them and tries to revoke their license, or threaten them to gag them. I just wanted to take a minute just to talk about the Canada Health Alliance. You'll see there's a brochure, there's one big brochure out there which has 2 inside it. Canada Health Alliance is a network that's been created in Canada for all healthcare workers, but also for people who are volunteers and want to help to change the face of medicine in our country. Because we found that many things were rotten to the core even before COVID came to intervene. We see that things are crumbling. That, like an abscess, the pus is draining, and it seems like an awful time. But it's absolutely necessary that we go to the bottom of the abscess and help it to heal from the bottom up. So when things seem like they're in bad, whether we're in bad shape, it's just because we're in the process. That's all. And Dr. Maurice talked about fear. But you know, there's fear on our side too, isn't there? This fear that we won't come out of this. And hope and fear are actually two sides of the same coin. We don't really need to have either. We just have to look at the reality of things. And if we can assess the reality of who we are as human beings and what is going on in the world, we will know that we're going to win this battle. We don't have to have hope because we can look at the facts telling us that we're going to come out not just as before, but better. So you don't need to have fear. You don't need to have hope. You just have to be in the present. In the present and know yourself. And then you'll be free. And those emotions are like a roller coaster every day, up and down. When we saw that they were coming after our kids, we hit the road. And that's why we're here with you tonight. What I would like to do is to take you through some of the science. And the questions you'd have to ask yourselves about this shot, this COVID vax. Of course, we know it's not a real vaccine, right? Because it cannot prevent transmission. You can still give it to people and you can still get it. And it doesn't even prevent severity of disease because the most severe people in the hospital are the double, triple vaxxed. So let's look at what we need to ask ourselves about this problem. Because pop-up clinics are coming your way. And we have to find a method of getting out in front and protecting our kids. Because those little kids cannot speak for themselves. They can't give informed consent. And they're being coerced with ice cream cones and balloons and little superheroes with masks, with capes and masks, the whole sort of thing to entice them. It's really predatory behavior. It's like kids are being invited to the back of a car with a puppy dog. And our public health is doing this to us. And our government, FDA, CDC, WHO, the UN, they're all in it, trying to kill our kids. So we have to ask ourselves, why are they doing that? So here are the questions to start with. What is the risk for my child of COVID-19? How does this risk compare to other childhood illnesses like influenza? Can a child pass COVID on to the elderly? In other words, we need to give a child a shot that they don't need personally to prevent them from infecting grandma, grandpa, or their teacher. What is the risk of the vaccine itself? I think we have to change that, maybe call it inoculation tonight. And why is inoculation information from the media so confusing? Now you've all seen these pictures. These are artist renditions and electron microscopy of the COVID virus. No one has actually ever seen this. I hear there's a stealth virus out now. You heard about that? I mean, if you can't see the virus, how can it get more stealthy than that? But no one's ever actually seen this virus. We've seen electron microscopy, but even that is questionable. But that spike protein is part of the corona. That's really important when it comes to making these new types of vaccines or inoculations, shots. COVID is really actually a triphasic disease, which includes the virus in the beginning, then inflammation, your immune system overreacting, and then clotting. It's a very complicated disease. But by the time you get into the hospital, because they sent you home, to wait it out until you got short of breath and turned blue, by that time you're into the second and third phase, right? So clotting is a big issue, and inflammation and immune system running rampant is a big part of that. When we heard about this COVID stuff coming our way, we were very scared. But when we looked at the data, we saw that there was actually no increase. So if we work here, 2020 is on the far right. And we saw that there was actually no increase in mortality, all-cause mortality. So that eliminated this false PCR test. It eliminated people just writing COVID on the death certificate because they got more money for it in the hospital. or they were instructed to do it to get the numbers up. All-cause mortality is a much better measurement. And as you can see from this graph, it goes up a little bit every year because the population is aging. But the rate of incline is the same. We did not have a pandemic. When we look at the statistics for BC, the survival rate was 99.97% without treatment, at least without good treatment. From 0 to 19, 0 deaths. And the median age of death from COVID in our province was 85. You know, people only live to 82, they're supposed to. So we're figuring out that actually COVID makes you live longer. And then we started looking at the stuff out of China, you know. So much theater designed to make us frightened, to get ready. And this is an example here. This is called the one-handed corpse carrying pose. It's a technique. There's other things, videos of, you know, dead bodies coming out of the body bags and having a cigarette, because they're actors and they get 15 minutes for a cigarette break. We also saw in the States, you know, many people who were found in there were these different sort of front pages of news, mainstream media. And it was the same person. They'd be in Tennessee, they'd be in Oklahoma, then they'd be in North Carolina. They were moving around. Right? Actors. In fact, I can't remember if it was CNN. They had a busy ICU in the United States, but in fact it was the ICU was in Italy. They'd taken this old film and put it up there. Our ICUs have not been like that at all. Now, ICUs are generally overflowing. That's always been like that, right? Looking at cold and flu season, but they're generally short of beds. Then we found out who their leader was. The TV set. How many people here don't watch TV? There's quite a few people watching TV still. But it's 24/7 propaganda. And it is very good propaganda. We know people in the field, they say this was so beautifully done, the way it was rolled out, the techniques that were used. They said, I mean, you've got to give these people credit. Unbelievable brainwashing. Do you know that the 6 feet apart that you stay, you know, you're supposed to be, that's what they use on the stage when you're a stage hypnotist. Because 6 feet apart is the optimum distance to make people anxious. And the more anxious you are, the more easily you're put under a hypnotic state. It was all planned. And of course, they didn't use anything that we needed, such as ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, budesonide inhalers, chlorine dioxide. There were many things which were used around the world successfully to treat. In fact, just ivermectin alone would have prevented 80% of the deaths in the United States. One drug. But it was banned, and doctors were run out of town if they used it. In BC, we're not allowed to prescribe it. In fact, the college is after me for prescribing for one patient. But I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk later about where you can get ivermectin. But ivermectin can be used early. It can be used actually for preventive. It can be used early during COVID. It can be used mid and late during COVID. It can be used for long COVID. But essentially it was blocked by Health Canada. They didn't want us to save patients. Institutions and hospitals as well. We have a colleague who, well, in Alberta, and on call on the weekend, he's an emergency doctor, maybe you know him, Dr. Daniel Nagase, who treated 3 patients who were doing very badly on the ward with ivermectin. Within a couple of days, 2 of them were on their way out of the hospital, and the other one was stabilized. And they were in their 70s, 2 of them in their 70s, one I believe was in their 90s. Doctors around the world have been using early treatment and combined treatment to successfully treat COVID. This is just one organization in the United States. They've treated 150,000 COVID cases. The success rate, 99.99%. Can't get much better than that. And if you had adequate vitamin E levels, we'll have some questions afterwards.
I just wanted to know why they don't use nebulizers
Why don't they use?
anymore. Nebulizers and
Yes. Well, we can talk about that later, okay? During the question period. The other thing, they did a study in Malaysia showing that if you had adequate vitamin D3 levels in your blood, there was a 0 mortality rate for all age groups, whether you're 1 year of age or 80. So how many people here take vitamin D? Lots. Good. Because you have to take in Canada, anything above the 37th parallel, you have to take vitamin D because the sun is on an angle. You're only getting UVA, not UVB, which is the midday sun. And you're probably, unlike us on Denman Island where we run around naked in the moonlight, you guys are probably all wearing clothes, right? Plus you can't get the conversion through the sun, through glass either. And if you're overweight, or you're skinny, you know, or you have inadequate food digestion and so forth, you just can't get enough vitamin D. So everyone needs to take it. How many people take 4,000 or 5,000 a day? Okay, good. You need to start there, 4,000 or 5,000, and then in a few months get a blood test. And if you take magnesium with it, you'll get more bang for your buck. And if you can now get it with vitamin K2, not K1, but K2, is there a mountain called K2?
Yeah.
If you get that mountain in there, vitamin K2, it will help you protect you from having the calcium deposit in your vessels, blood vessels. Okay, so it's very important.
K2, is that?
K2, vitamin K as in king, 2 as in 1, 2. Of course, they told us to do other things. Don't take vitamin D. You know, very early in this, I sent a letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry saying, why don't we give vitamin D to everybody at adequate doses in the long-term care homes? And I never heard back from her. So I spoke to our local guys, and I spoke to the long-term care people. And some laughed. Some rejected the idea outright. And we got an intercepted email that said, those people up in the Comox Valley think that vitamin D and vitamins can cure everything. So dismissive of us. We're trying to help our elderly, the most fragile, you know, the most likely to be injured by COVID. So what is the risk to my child? Now these are Canadian statistics, a little different from BC. But over all of Canada, we think maybe 14 to 20 children died with COVID, but not from COVID. I think all those children died with severe comorbidities. But you can see, below the age of 50, you're at very low risk. And in fact, influenza is 3 times as likely to kill your 0 to 19-year-old child as COVID. That's even using the bad statistics, right? Without any early treatment. In Sweden, they did a study of 2 million children. They didn't wear masks. Schools were open. They had a 0 mortality rate between 1 and 16 years of age. In Germany, they looked at 3 studies between 5 and 18 years of age. They put them all together, like surveys of people, and the mortality rate was also 0. So that's what we're looking at for the danger of our child dying from COVID in Canada. 0. Why would you need a shot for that? Other questions? You know, 75% of kids have no symptoms with COVID, right? Only 25%. So we don't know if they've had it. And the question comes up, do they pass it on? We need to protect the other people by injecting them. But a study out of Sweden, actually there were quite a few studies done that showed, well, the best place to be a professional was in the kindergarten. Because teachers were the safest profession, because they were just exposed to kids. And kids weren't passing it up the chain. So they rarely move it to the side to other kids in their classes, and they almost never pass it upward. So no point giving them a jab to protect grandma, because they don't pass it up to grandma. And the other thing is it doesn't stop transmission anyway. This is Dr. Walensky, who's a CDC lead. And boy, I think she and Fauci are neck on neck in flip-flopping and not answering questions. She's a pro. But even she's had to admit that these shots do not prevent you from catching it or from giving it. So again, there's no reason to give it to your kid for that. And then natural immunity. Now the problem here is with the shot, there's a thing called antibody-dependent enhancement, or pathogenic priming. It's a peculiar thing with coronaviruses. It's a bit like a bee sting. First bee sting doesn't bother you very much. But the second one, if you're an allergic person where you have an immune system that's poorly regulated, then you have an overreaction. A swollen arm, trouble breathing, the stinging, burning, that type of thing. Like a full-on anaphylactic reaction. But it's not usually with the first sting. So let's say these kids have they get COVID, they don't have any symptoms. And then along comes the second bee sting. And then those children can get very sick. Extremely dangerous for them. So let's look at a quick summary. Most children have mild or no symptoms. 75% have no symptoms. They rarely get ill. You can't find them in the ICU. Death rate in Canada for healthy children is 0. Under age 20, all the kids that died had severe comorbidities. It doesn't leave damage behind. So unlike adults, old elderly people who have inflammation, maybe clotting in the lungs, for kids it never gets down that far. It doesn't cause them a problem that leaves sequelae to go on for months afterwards or years. So they're safe from things getting stuck. Children catch it from adults, not the other way around. They don't transmit it to adults. And treatment is available that is effective. But we're banned as doctors from using it. Unless you have a couple of horses somewhere. So why does my child need a vaccine? Now this is an artificial gene product, biologic product. And what it's designed to do, as you probably all know, it's to, through the shock, go into the cells of your body and hijack the mechanism for producing proteins. But the messenger RNA that they've created triggers the production of spike proteins like you would see on the coronavirus. Meaning that, hoping that, when your immune system then gets, exposed to this fake spike that's being made in the cells, that when it sees the real virus coming in the future, it will be aware of what it is and will mount a very fast and effective defense. The problem is that there were some things that they forgot to check in their very short studies and lack of long-term studies, and no animal studies. The spike proteins are toxic in more than one way. And Dr. Hoff's going to talk to you about that in a moment. But more importantly, there doesn't appear to be an off switch. Once your system starts producing spike proteins, we don't know how long it will last. If you get your second shot and booster after booster, you're propagating that hijacking of your machinery on a constant basis, spending spike proteins everywhere. And we do know that from studies that when people get a shot, it does not stay in your shoulder. It doesn't. It goes everywhere through your body very quickly. It goes to your heart, it goes to your lungs, it goes to your brain. It goes to your ovaries. It's a lot more dangerous than we thought. Now, if you had COVID, as we mentioned with kids, then you get a second shot, you may have this funny thing called pathogenic priming where you have the immune system goes crazy, inflammation. And they had a study with 30 kids using respiratory syncytial virus. It wasn't an mRNA injection, but they were trying to create a vaccine to a particular class of cold virus. 2 of those kids died, and the rest of them were hospitalized when they were exposed to the real virus, despite the fact they had antibodies. So they had an overreaction. And if you look at this study in the UK, to get a severe adverse event, after the first. If you've had COVID already, then your chance of having a severe adverse event are 56% higher than other people who haven't had COVID. And another UK study, and also an Italian study, it showed that if you'd already had COVID, even if you didn't know you had it, because you had mild symptoms, you thought it was a cold, because of that particular virus and its peculiar nature of coronaviruses, you have 3 times increased risk of having an adverse event. Now, Dr. Hoff's going to tell you about some of those adverse events that he's seen in his own practice. And I think you will be startled. I'm going to pass it over to him. But first, did you want to say something, Carrie? Yeah. You can bet that Carrie's going to want to say something.
Thank you, Dr. Malthouse. Now, we have every event, live stream the event, and we have a bunch of people who I think just love to see all the British Columbians that meet with us. So give a big round of applause to all of our online audience. So there are videos available at both frontlinecanada.ca and CanadaHealthAlliance.org websites. You can find the ones that we've done on the island. I think most of the live streams are up there. And all the special events that happen on our tour. And I do want to tell you about a special event that will be happening tomorrow at 11:30. You can join in on our live stream. Now, Dr. Stephen Malthouse has suddenly found out that people can send hearts while we're online, okay? So when people say something that people really like, hearts float around, okay? And he really wants all the hearts. So at some point, so as we've traveled and listened to the stories, things that perplex people the most is how people still grab on to the lunacy that's attached to this and the division that's caused and how dogmatic people still are, even though they see all this evidence that this experiment is not working. You know, here we welcome everybody, vax, unvax, we don't care, we hope you learn and that you are empowered to make good decisions that will result in health and freedom. So as we listen to these stories, you know, we've decided, because it's just incredible. Even in my own world, right? My husband went to deliver Christmas gifts to our neighbor 3 doors down. And he says, "How are you, Trish?" And she says, "Well, you know what? I'm pretty excited. I thought I'd have to wait a long time to get my booster because, you know, they say how busy it's going to be. But I called and I can get it within the next 2 days." And then she goes, "But I have to make sure my husband is home because when I got my second shot, I had to be taken by the ambulance to the hospital." I'm in the bank doing paperwork for one of the businesses, and I said to the gal, I said, "So, you know, have you been able to work from home?" She says, "Oh, I was one of the lucky ones. I got the first 2 shots ahead of everybody else because my mother-in-law is immune compromised." I said, "Oh, so we got them right away." And I said, "Well, was there any adverse reactions?" She says, "Well, actually, my mother-in-law got so sick she couldn't eat for 5 or 6 days, but thank God she got the shot because she could have got sicker if she got COVID." You know, all of these things. So we've decided on the bus, because we do get hours together, traveling from event to event, that there is an alien language, and maybe these tinfoil hat people have something. We figure it's the COVID aliens that are doing this. So we've decided that we really need to protect ourselves. So we are having a tinfoil hat competition. Now, Dr. Malthouse, as you've already seen, has many talents. Not only is he an awesome doctor, great speaker, not a bad singer, but you should see his talents when it comes to making tinfoil hats, okay? Now, he did get a little head start because he claimed that he was making the trophy, but we know it was actually practicing, getting the feel of the foil, seeing what it could do. And I don't know why, but there's a lot of spike protein looking things floating around the bus, right? So tomorrow, obviously there had to be a competition to see who could do this. So tomorrow at 11:30, we will be live streaming for everybody to vote, all right, on whose tinfoil hat is the best creation, okay?
And if you don't vote for me, you're in big trouble.
He's in need of lots of hearts, you guys. All right, a couple of things. There in a moment will be a sign-up sheet coming around because we want to keep in touch with you guys. We need to, as people power, come together and say enough. We have the knowledge, we're getting more knowledge tonight, but then we need to have more action to put this full stop, okay? So please write legibly, and we will know where you're at. So there's lots of things you're going to want to know about, and if you're on our database, you will know about it. You will want to know, for instance, when we Ignite Initiative. We have this wonderful people power legislation here in BC called Recall and Initiative. Initiative allows us to create laws, change laws, or get rid of laws. You're going to want to know because we're going to need your help because the time periods are very small to do this, to mobilize the province to all come out and sign. But when you hear that we are going to ignite the petition to make it illegal for medical professionals to give intervention or injections in this case to children under 18 under the Infants Act, we are going to make that illegal.
Yeah.
You're going to want to know when we start the initiative to make it illegal to fire anybody because they won't participate in a medical experiment. We have to wait 18 months after the last provincial election, but starting in April, we can recall Premier Horgan. Woo! Minister Dix. And if you're on our little sign-up list and get information from us, you will know when I write to Bonnie Henry and demand her resignation. Because I will get in trouble from all the people who work with me, all right? And I get enough trouble without even trying, okay? So spare me that amount. All right, without further ado, Dr. Charles Hoff. Yes.
Yeah, I've got the picture. That little. Yeah, but that's okay. Well, it is wonderful to be here in Williams Lake. Thank you so much for coming out. I live down in Lytton in the Fraser Canyon, Canada's hotspot. I pass through Williams Lake quite often on my way to the Chilcotin, which I absolutely love. So it's wonderful to be here, and I want to thank Pastor Darren for allowing us to use your church. Thank you so much. So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things this evening. The first thing is I just wanted to tell you a bit about my story, what happened to me in Lytton, what happened to my patients when they got these COVID shots. because I think that story is a really important story because it gives us a picture of what is happening to our nation. And then I wanted to talk about this darkness that has descended upon our land. Because this country has changed very dramatically. I came to Canada in 1990 from South Africa. And I was thrilled to find a nation of wonderful people who were kind and tolerant and easygoing. It was a land of freedom and it was a land of opportunity. But something has gone seriously wrong. When this pandemic started rolling out, just as Dr. Maurice mentioned, most doctors were pretty nervous. They were talking about calling doctors back from retirement. We were expecting this flood of seriously ill people to be jamming up our emergency rooms and ICUs. And I had to learn how to put on all that PPE and was wondering how we were going to manage. Lytton's a tiny community where most of the time we have one doctor on duty and one nurse on duty, and we were expecting the ambulance to be bringing in all these critically ill people. And I was worried. But then I discovered that the survival rate for COVID-19, even without any outpatient treatment, is approximately the same as the flu. Flu is a dangerous disease for the frail elderly. Most of the people who die from the flu live in the old age homes, in the long-term care facilities. Do any of you know any children that have died from the flu? The flu is 3 times more dangerous to children than COVID. So the risk to children from COVID is almost zero. Yet there was all this panic and fear. And I had learned from studying the previous history of attempts to make gene-based vaccines that they had not gone well. And that research had been abandoned because it was found to be extremely unsafe. So I was skeptical right from the start about the safety of these shots that we were told was going to rescue us out of this terrible fear. And of course, the public health authorities were making us wear masks and making us stay away from one another, and schools were closed, and businesses and restaurants were closed, and the gymnasiums were closed, and people were living in fear. People didn't want to visit one another. Our elders in the long-term care facilities were literally in solitary confinement, and they were dying alone and of loneliness. And the effects mentally on people were terrible. The suicide rate went up, the overdose rate went up. Mentally, the fear and the isolation and the uncertainty were devastating to Canada and across the world. And every other nation followed the same narrative of fear, which was driven by our leaders and by the media. But when I discovered from my medical colleagues just what Dr. Maurice mentioned, that instead of this flood of desperately ill people coming into the emergency rooms and the hospitals, we were much quieter than usual. And all that PPE that I had practiced putting on and taking off, and were learning what sequence you had to take it off in so that you didn't contaminate yourself with this deadly virus and kill yourself. By the time that Lytton burned to the ground last summer, which was 18 months into this pandemic, the ambulances there had not brought in one single person with COVID. Not one. And our ventilator had sat idle, gathering dust, while we waited for the tsunami of dying people to come And I realized that the media and the government had completely exaggerated this, because this was the story across the world. So in about March of last year, when news started coming from other countries about serious blood clots, and 12 countries in Europe had shut down the AstraZeneca vaccine because of blood clots, I sent a letter, an email to some of my colleagues in the Lytton and Lillooet area saying that we had reached a turning point in this vaccine rollout. Because there's a foundational principle of medical ethics that if you are doing and testing out an experimental treatment and there becomes evidence of harm, you are supposed to stop the experiment. Because the Hippocratic Oath, which every doctor has taken when he becomes a doctor, is that you will do no harm. And every vaccine injury is harm caused to an otherwise healthy person. It is contrary to the Hippocratic Oath. So I sent this email to them saying, do you think it's time to pause this to take stock? And one of those 18 people that I sent that email to, of my colleagues, sent this email to my superiors in Kamloops at Interior Health. And shortly after that, I had a meeting with them where I was reprimanded. And I was told that I was going to be reported to the College of Physicians and Surgeons to be put under investigation because I was causing vaccine hesitancy. And I was told that I was not allowed to say anything negative about these shots in our health facility. And that if I had any questions, they were not to be directed to my colleagues, but to the medical health officer in charge of the vaccine rollout for the Thompson-Nicola region in Kamloops. So I was quite astonished that as a doctor, I had taken an oath, the Hippocratic Oath, that doctors should do no harm. And now there was evidence of harm from this experiment. And I had dared to question the safety of it. And I was being threatened. And I had been gagged. And I had been told that I was going to be put under investigation. So I waited for the registered letter to come from the college. But then in the days that followed, people started coming into my office with serious vaccine injuries. And the First Nations people and the elderly were the people to have been singled out first to receive this experiment. And that troubled me very much, because neither of those groups of people had been included in the trials that happened very briefly for these shots. These groups were singled out as vulnerable groups, and that was the government's excuse for giving them the experiment first. But neither of those groups of people had been in any of the clinical trials. So when I saw these injured people coming into my office, I sent a letter to that medical health officer who I'd been told to address my questions to. And I asked her what the mechanism of injury was and how I should be treating it. And I got no answer. So I thought, well, I better go higher up. Maybe she doesn't know. So I sent an open letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry. And I asked her the same questions. I told her what had happened to my patients, about all the neurological problems that I was seeing. I told her about my concerns about the ethics of this experiment. That if you're doing an experiment and there is clear evidence of harm, you're supposed to stop the experiment. And I asked her what the mechanism of injury was. In other words, what in this shot hurt these people? Because you have to understand that to know how to treat them. It's like if you're a mechanic and you don't understand how an engine works, you're never going to be able to fix it. You've got to know what went wrong in order to know how to put it right. Bonnie Henry could not give me any answer. But she referred the matter to a vaccine safety specialist, who assured me that none of the neurological problems that my patients had after these shots could possibly be from the shots. Because they were safe and effective. These were all coincidences. So I realized that the people who were responsible for monitoring the safety of this did not know anything about it. So I filled out vaccine injury reporting forms on my patients, and I'll tell you that I've now sent 14 to that medical health officer in Kamloops. And the report backs I get on all of them is that these are not injuries from the shot, these are all coincidences. So the people who have been put in charge of monitoring the safety of this experimental treatment are vaccine injury deniers. And now they want to give this to our children. So I set out to figure out what went wrong in my patients. Because the people who were the so-called experts clearly didn't know. And so I consulted with brilliant scientists from Europe and from around the world, and I learned that these shots, unlike regular vaccines that stay in your arm, stay in your muscle, these go into your bloodstream. 75% of them literally get distributed around the rest of your body. So that these little packages, these little nanocapsules of these little lipid-soluble capsules of messenger RNA literally end up in your brain, in your lungs, in your heart, in your liver, in literally every part of your body. Which means that when those packages are absorbed from your bloodstream, which happens, by the way, in capillary networks are the networks of the tiniest vessels, where the blood slows right down. And that's where absorption happens. So all of these little packages of messenger RNA end up in the cells around your blood vessels in the capillary networks. And so that is where these RNA strands are released from these little capsules, and your body gets to work making trillions and trillions of spike proteins. And because those spikes are usually part of a viral capsule, they're usually part of the, in effect, like the cell wall of the virus. We call it the capsule, and they all stick out like spikes on a sea urchin. When they're in your cells, they're going to form part of the cell wall. And so the problem is then that the cells around your blood vessels will no longer be smooth. They are now going to have these little spikes sticking right into your blood vessels. Now, God has designed our bodies so that if you cut yourself, we have little cells in our blood called platelets. And the purpose of a platelet is to recognize a damaged vessel and block it to stop bleeding. And what the trigger is for that platelet to trigger a clot is a rough spot. That's what a damage is. It's going to hit a rough spot and know that the smooth vessel is now rough, therefore it is damaged and needs to be blocked. So therefore it is completely predictable that these spikes will cause clots because of where they are. They're in your blood vessels. So I then set out to try and figure out if this could be true. Because if you figured out how is this working, what is it doing, it's like understanding an engine so that you can fix it. You've got to know how it all works to figure out what's going wrong. So I was told that I needed to do a blood test called a D-dimer. And the D-dimer is a blood test that doctors do in the emergency room to see if they might be clotting somewhere in the body. And so as patients came into my office, I would ask them if they'd had their shot or if they were going to have their shot. Because I was looking for people who hadn't had their shot yet, that were going to have their shot sort of the next couple of weeks. So that I could get them to do a baseline D-dimer before their shot, and then do another one after their shot, so that I could see what the difference was and see if they were clotting. So I started doing these D-dimer tests on my patients, and I was horrified because I found that more than half of them had clotting. And these were people who were not vaccine injured. These were people who their shots went, who thought their shots had done no harm. But I'll tell you what the relevance of this is. Firstly, that blood clots leave that vessel permanently damaged. A clotted vessel never goes back to normal. It is permanently obstructed for the rest of your life. The second important thing was the clots are not rare. Our medical health experts will tell you that the clots are incredibly rare. But I think all of you probably now know people that have had strokes and heart attacks and brain clots and all kinds of other things after their shots. We all know from our own people around us that these things are not rare. But what I was looking for was microclots. Microscopic clots in the capillaries that you cannot see on any scan because they are too tiny and they are scattered. And the third thing that we learn from this is not just that is the clotting not rare, not just is it permanent damage, but it is going to accumulate with every shot. I'm going to look at one, if we could dim the lights for a minute, we're going to look at the first slide. Are we doing one more light? Yeah, thank you. So what you can see here, there is a blood vessel. These are the spikes all the way around the sides. You can see the same thing there. Do you see the spikes on the side of the blood vessels? These were done by a pathologist who did slide sections of somebody who had died from their COVID shot. They actually did it on, was it 24 people?
25 and 24 died from COVID.
Okay, so they had 25 dead bodies of people who had died after their shot. And this is what they found. 24 of those people, these spikes that surrounded the blood vessels. So this is the proof that this theory of what I found in my D-dimer test is true science. These are a clot shot. It is not rare. It happens to more than half of people. It is permanent damage, and it will accumulate with every shot. Can we have the lights on? Thank you. About a month or 5 or 6 weeks, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks after I was told that I was not allowed to say anything negative about these shots, a lady came into our emergency room with a vaccine injury. And I was on duty for the emergency room. It was on a weekend. And the nurse phoned me at home to tell me about this person that came in. And she explained what was happening to this poor lady. And I said to her, that lady had COVID. She and her whole family had COVID about 5 weeks ago. Please will you tell her she doesn't need her second shot? And in fact, what had happened to this poor lady, we know that people who already have natural immunity to COVID from a natural infection are at a much higher risk of vaccine injury because their body is primed against those spikes. The body knows about their spikes, they've had the virus. So when you inject a vaccine into them that gives them trillions and trillions of spikes, they are at a much higher risk of having an adverse reaction. And this is what happened to this woman. That's why she came in. She had COVID and had a minimal illness. She got the shot and was way more sick. And she thought something had gone wrong. Well, it had. She should never have been vaccinated. She had natural immunity. So I told that nurse, I said, please just explain to her that she doesn't need her second shot. And so the nurse said that she was not allowed to tell anybody that they didn't need a COVID shot. So I said, okay, that's fine. And I explained to the nurse all of the scientific information about why somebody with natural immunity doesn't need a shot. And I explained to her that study that was done in Singapore the previous year, where they were trying to figure out how long will natural immunity last. And they found in that study that it will last at least 18 years, and it is broad enough to cover every variant. And so I explained all of that to that nurse. The reason, the science behind why somebody who has natural immunity doesn't need a COVID shot. And that discussion with that nurse got back to the superiors in Interior Health, who were now mad as a snake with me because people were asking me about all the vaccine injuries in my patients after my Bonnie Henry letter. And I was fired. I had been an emergency room physician for 31 years. And I lost my job for explaining to an emergency room nurse why somebody who has natural immunity doesn't need a COVID shot.
Yeah.
Something is seriously wrong in this land. And I thought, isn't this odd? This is a patient, this is a doctor who is concerned for the safety of his patients, who knows that somebody who has natural immunity doesn't need to be vaccinated, and who is getting punished for following the science, and who is getting punished for daring to question the safety of this experiment. And then came the Lytton fire, which annihilated 90% of our little town and burned my medical practice and our whole health facility to the ground. And so many of my patients lost everything. It was a devastating time. So my D-dimer research ground to a halt because we don't even have a laboratory there anymore. It's a pile of ash. So I can no longer give a paper to a patient and say, would you be willing to contribute to this research to see if you got clotting when you had your clot shot? Sorry, Larry. Can we dim the lights again? We're just going to go to the next slide. So I've got an important announcement to make. Here we are 1 year into this vaccine rollout. Right near the beginning, I was deeply concerned about the risk. I am passionate about patient safety and the Hippocratic oath that doctors should do no harm. That is why I'm standing here before you, because I took that oath that doctors should do no harm. And if you see harm, if you see your neighbor being harmed or anyone being harmed and you stand by and do nothing, you are complicit in their harm. And I could not keep silent because I love my patients and I was determined to try and keep them safe. These, as I told you, Canada doesn't have a vaccine injury reporting system. It pretends to, but it is censored. Because the people who run it are vaccine injury deniers. And these COVID shots have become the commonest cause of coincidences known to medical science. But these are the numbers from the USA. And the top left-hand box, that gives you a number of 22,193. That is the number of people who have died suddenly and unexpectedly shortly after their COVID shot so far in the United States. 22,000 people who were told that this was going to keep them safe. And a study done at Harvard University in the US about 10 years ago to see what percentage of vaccine injuries ever even got reported found that less than 1% of all vaccine injuries are ever reported. So actually we should be multiplying that by 100, which means we've got 2.2 million people dead in the US from the shot that was supposed to keep them safe. And the second box, 118,000, is the number of people that ended up in hospital after having this shot that was supposed to keep them safe. And the number that you won't see on there because it's not with these things, it was lower down on the page if you look at their website, you will see the number of reported vaccine injuries. It is well over 1 million. We were told when all these, do you remember when Bonnie Henry said just 2 weeks to flatten the curve, when she told us all the, anyway, here we are 2 years later and more restrictions than ever. And all of these onerous restrictions that were supposed to keep us safe and were supposed to stop the spread of COVID, and now we've had a year of vaccines, and yet there is so much COVID that they've stopped. They told people don't go for a test. I think it's an embarrassment. They don't want people to know how many people are getting COVID. More than 90% of this province is now vaccinated. Well, more than it's, I think it's 91% have had at least one, and it's about 86% have had 2 shots, at least 2. And yet there is more COVID than ever. So you don't have to be a statistician or a scientist to realize that the shots don't work. If 90% of the province is vaxxed and there's more COVID than ever, obviously they don't work. And if you've got 22,000 people dead and 1 million vaccine injuries just in the US, obviously they're not safe. You don't have to look at peer-reviewed studies and sort of complex science. It is obvious that this vaccine rollout has been a disaster. Never in human history has any medical intervention killed and injured so many people in such a short space of time and given so little benefit. A great darkness has descended upon this land. This slide, if you can see it, shows you a graph of total deaths from all vaccines for the last 30 years. You can see how low it was all the way along the bottom until you hit the last box there is 2021, when the COVID vaccine rollout starts. And they say it's safe and effective. It is absurd. It is absolutely absurd. So I told you about how the clots are permanent damage. But there are other ways that these things cause permanent damage. This is a tragic photograph of a father whose son, who was a very keen hockey player, took the jab so that he could play hockey. He was told that he needed to have this jab to keep other people safe. And here this father has made this poster of his broken heart of his son who is now dead. Because he took this shot that was supposed to keep people safe. In the USA alone, they now have 21,000 cases of myocarditis. 21,000. And our medical health authorities will tell you it's incredibly rare. Doctors can do a medical test called a troponin. The troponin is a test we do in the emergency room to see if you're having a heart attack. It detects damage to heart muscle. They have found that if you do that, a study was done where they took young men who had this shot, and they found that in the 16 to 18-year-old age group, approximately 1 in 300 had evidence of had an elevated troponin. In other words, myocarditis is not rare. And the 21,000 cases in the US is evidence that it is not rare. But the problem with myocarditis, just like the clots that injured my patients, is that it is permanent damage because heart muscle cannot regenerate. There is no such thing as mild heart damage. If your heart is permanently damaged, it's not mild. You will live a shorter life because your cardiac reserve will be reduced. And myocarditis, by the way, is a problem right up to the mid-50s. It's not just the teenagers and the university students. It is permanent damage, and it will accumulate with every shot, and it is not rare. But thirdly, we are seeing serious cancers that are now arising because these shots literally change the function of your genes. These are a gene modification. Not only can that RNA change your DNA through a mechanism called reverse transcriptase, but what these shots, we now know that these shots are literally deleting genes and blocking genes. It is the spike protein that does it. That literally the gene, these shots are designed to block the gene that enables your body to recognize damaged DNA. In other words, to recognize tumor cells, to recognize mutations that occur in your body when your cells replicate. And pathologists and oncologists are now reporting enormous increases in cancers in people who they knew were cancer-free because, well, they'd previously had cancer and seemed to be cured because they follow them year by year until they have their COVID shot. And literally they go from by all evidence cancer-free to literally end stage 4 in 5 months. Because this literally destroys your body's, that part of your immune system, it literally stops your body from being able to detect tumor cells. So these things are doing serious damage on a multitude of levels. They are not safe. And as we know from the rampant COVID around us, they are not effective. This is a slide of total myocarditis from all vaccines. And you can see again what happens when we get to 2021. Absolute skyrocket. Reflected by the 21,000 cases in the US. And this last tragic slide is a collage of beautiful young faces. Of children and young people who were told this was going to keep them safe. Or that they needed to do this, to have this shot, to keep their friends safe. Or to keep their grandparents safe. Or so that they could play sport, or go dancing, or go on school field trips. This is not safe. And it is not effective. Can we have the lights back on? Doctors are trained to practice what we call evidence-based medicine. In other words, we're supposed to constantly examine the evidence to see if what we're doing is correct. Science and medicine are never static. They are always changing to improve. And that is why it is critically important that doctors have to constantly examine the evidence. And why I've shown you some evidence of what I have found and what I have seen in my patients. And I should tell you, you might want to ask, so what actually were the injuries that I saw in my patients? Most of them are neurological injuries. These are people who now live with chronic pain. For some people, it is just relentless headaches. For other people, it is pain in their limbs. For some people, it's burning and tingling. For some, it's electric shocks that shoot down their limbs. I have a lady who I sent down to St. Paul's to be investigated. They wouldn't see her for 4 months. And when they saw her, they admitted her and kept her in hospital for 8 days. And they do all the scans, and they don't know what to say. She has slurred speech. She's 38 years old. She had nothing wrong with her before she had this shot. Now for the last year, she has not been able to drive a car. She has slurred speech because her tongue is partly paralyzed, so she has difficulty manipulating food in her mouth. She has chronic pain in her face, pain in her neck. She had a Bell's palsy first on one side of her face, then on the other side of her face. She has multiple neuropathies, and the neurologists there have no idea what to even call this new disease that we have created. This is criminal. The Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm. And yet they carry on rolling this thing out and telling us it is safe and effective. So that young lady, I think, had all these microscopic clots in her brain that affected those different parts of her body. And they're too small to show on the scans. They keep doing MRIs. Nothing shows. But yet she is disabled. She has not been able to work. She can't even drive a car. She has light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. Her life is ruined. And yet in all the medical reports I get back from them, never is the vaccine mentioned. Because doctors are terrified to attribute any blame to this. It is weird. It is weird. Perhaps they see what happens to people like me that say this is wrong, and they shut up. Perhaps that's why so few doctors are willing to stand up, because they see what the authorities do to any doctor that dares to stand by their Hippocratic oath. Now, you might have noticed that all of the restrictions that have been put upon us, the masks and the social distancing, and the churches closed, and the businesses closed, and the schools that were closed, and all the things that were cancelled and shut down were all to keep us safe. Have you noticed that? All these things are to keep us safe. But let's look at the evidence. Is this really to keep us safe? Remember, doctors are supposed to practice evidence-based medicine. If you're a judge in a court of law and you're looking at evidence, what a judge does when he looks at the evidence of a witness, he looks for inconsistencies in the story, parts that don't quite add up, to see if what that witness is saying is true. That's what lawyers are trained to do. They look for inconsistencies, because that discredits the witness if their story just doesn't add up. So we are told that all the things that public health has restricted us with are to keep us safe. But yet, have you ever wondered why there's so many travel restrictions now to stop the spread of a virus that's already everywhere? Does that make any sense to you? How can travel restrictions keep us safe if the virus is already everywhere? It's a good question to ask your friends who might think that they might believe this narrative. Just ask them that one. If the public health authorities are so concerned about keeping us safe, have you ever wondered why is it that they refuse to allow doctors to prescribe ivermectin? And why is it that they've gone to so much trouble to try and discredit it as horse dewormer when it is literally one of the safest medications known to man? The person who discovered ivermectin got the Nobel Prize. And it has been used on humans around the world for almost 40 years. So we know a lot about its safety. It is not an experiment. It is very, very safe. And it has been known to have brilliant antiviral properties since 2010. And so it was a natural thing to try for this virus when they were looking for things that we had already, that we knew were safe, that are cheap and safe. It was a good thing to try. And it has turned out to be a brilliant medication for COVID-19. But the fact that they refute, there are now 68 scientific studies showing the effectiveness of ivermectin, as Dr. Malthouse showed you in one of those slides. And yet they refuse to look at the science. There are 298 studies showing the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine. Yet they'll tell you that it doesn't work and that it is not safe. Both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are both listed by the WHO, the World Health Organization, as essential medicines because they are so important for public health. Yet somehow, magically, when COVID appeared, they were no longer safe. There seems to be some inconsistency in the evidence. The fact that the public health authorities will not offer you any antiviral treatment to keep you out of hospital. They tell you to go home and do nothing until you can't breathe. Imagine if a doctor did that to you. Let's say you got an infected wound. And you went to your doctor and he said, yep, you got an infected wound, so go home and do nothing. And when you think it's critical, come back and we'll start treatment. Imagine if you were getting a pneumonia or a bronchitis and you went to your doctor, I really think I'm getting a pneumonia again. And he listens to your chest and he goes, oh, it sounds like you're getting a pneumonia, so just go home and do nothing. And when your lips turn blue, then come back and we'll start treatment. I don't think you would be very happy because it is not safe and it is not sensible. To withhold treatment is doing harm, and the Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm. So obviously these public health policies are not about keeping us safe. Why do you think that the public health authorities are so determined for people who are already immune to COVID to have these shots that they don't want and they don't need and that have a higher risk of injury because they're already primed against the spike? Why do you think they will not recognize natural immunity? There are now 146 scientific studies on the effectiveness of natural immunity. And if you want to look them up, go to a website called Brownstone. And at Brownstone, you can look up all of those 146 scientific studies. Yet our medical authorities who tell us they want to keep us safe will not look at them because their aim is to get as many shots into as many arms as possible. Quite obviously, this is not about safety. This is about getting everybody jabbed. If the public health authorities are genuine about safety, why do they censor vaccine injury reporting? I mean, really, this evidence seems to be a bit inconsistent. You would think that they would be eager to know about the injuries and not just deny them. Obviously, the agenda is not about safety. It makes no sense. And why, if they're so concerned about your safety, do they persecute any doctor who dares to question the safety of this? It makes no sense. And why, if they are so concerned about safety, are they so determined to vaccinate our children with the most dangerous medical treatment that has ever been invented against a disease that poses almost no risk to them? Obviously, this is not about safety. This is about getting as many shots into as many arms as possible. Because the testimony, the evidence, doesn't line up with what they tell us. Obviously, this is not about safety. It's not hard to see. As I told you, when I came to Canada, I found a land of freedom, a land of opportunity, a land of loving, tolerant people. And I was thrilled to be here. But a great darkness has descended upon this land. And people now live in fear. And some people live in fear of the virus, and some people live in fear of the increasing oppression upon us by the authorities. Many friends that I have that escaped from communist countries before the fall of the Iron Curtain. There were people who have lived under communism are extremely concerned about what they're seeing here because they have seen it before. The steady encroachment on our civil liberties, the increased surveillance of the authorities, and the persecution of any who stand in the way. Last week, the newspaper, The Western Standard, published a survey that had been done of 1,500 Canadians. I was astonished when I looked at this survey because it gave me a picture of the alarming things that have happened to this nation. They asked 3 questions. The first question was, do you think that people who refuse to be vaccinated should do 5 days in jail? 27% of respondents said yes. If these people are not willing to be vaccinated, they need to do time in jail. This is based, by the way, on this nonsense from the government that somehow by being vaccinated you can keep other people safe. Now, when we look at the evidence of all these medical facilities and all these places where the unvaccinated have now been banished, and all of the fully vaxxed people are wearing masks, and it's full of COVID. So obviously the shots didn't work and neither did the masks. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. And yet they've somehow still managed to persuade people that by being vaccinated you can keep someone else safe. I think everyone now knows. We all know so many people who are vaxxed and still got COVID. And we know that people who get COVID, who are vaxxed, have just as much of a viral load that they breathe out as unvaxxed people that get COVID. So it doesn't, they're mandating a vaccine that can never stop COVID because the vaxxed people still get it and they still spread it. But yet all of these people have been brainwashed into thinking that somehow you can keep someone else safe by getting this jab. They're just not thinking. And that's what's happened here. These 27% of the people in this survey that said that unvaxxed people that refuse to get vaxxed should go to jail. They somehow think that we're antisocial and that we're somehow putting others at risk. They just need to look at this. They just need to look around them. They don't even have to look at the science. Just look at how many of their friends still got COVID. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to figure that out. So the second question in the survey. Do you think the unvaccinated should not be allowed to go into the hospitals? In other words, do you believe that anyone who refuses to have this injection that has the worst safety record of any medical treatment in history should be denied health care? Do you know that 37% of people said yes, they should be banned from the hospital? This is the land of tolerant, loving people who now think that you should do time in jail or be denied health care if you won't have your clot shot. The third question that they asked them, do you think that people who refuse to be vaccinated should not be allowed to renew their driver's license? I kid you not. 33% of people, in other words, a third of all the people surveyed, and it was a survey of 1,500 people, 33% said, do not renew their driver's license. What has happened to this nation? I want to close off by telling you a little story about my childhood. Because just as those people who I know that have come from communist countries have told me about how alarmed they are about what is happening to this nation, My experiences as a child in South Africa made me alarmed about what has happened to this nation. I grew up under the apartheid system. Now, apartheid, for those of you that maybe are too young or haven't read the history books, apartheid is an Afrikaans word that comes from South Africa that was a system of government-mandated segregation of people according to ethnicity and skin color. In South Africa, the land that I grew up in, there were 3 classes of citizens. If you were white, you were a first-class citizen. You were the privileged class. If you were East Indian or of mixed race, you were a second-class citizen. And if you were black, you were third class. And they would not allow, in parks, they would not allow a black person to sit on a white bench. They literally had signs on them because a white person, black people were portrayed sort of as somehow dirty or carriers of disease or somehow inferior. They had separate buses for blacks and whites, separate schools, separate hospitals. Black people were not allowed into restaurants or into cinemas because they were black. They were third-class citizens. And the family that I grew up in was deeply, deeply troubled by this injustice. Because we loved all of our neighbors. It didn't matter who they were. And when I say loved our neighbors, I'm talking about that in the biblical sense. Is your neighbor is whoever you meet. Because there were areas where only white people could be. And there were areas that were designated for the black people to be. They called them homelands. And for a black person to leave their homeland, and calling it a homeland was a ridiculous thing because most of them never came from there. They were just sent there. And for a black person to be able to leave their homeland and go to the city to find a job, they had to have some paper, something called a pass. And if they were found in a city without their pass, they were literally arrested and put in jail. And after doing time in jail, they were shipped back to their homeland. And the police would randomly check just the black people walking down the road, show me your pass. And if they didn't have their pass or if it had expired, they would be, on would go the handcuffs, off to the jail. And their police vehicles there were not like ours with nice seats. It was literally a pickup with a metal canopy with bars on the windows, and it would usually be parked around the corner. They would fill it up by just stopping people that were walking down the road. Show me your pass. And these people would go to jail simply for being in the wrong place without the right paperwork. And these were the people who were not allowed to go into a restaurant. They could work in the restaurant if they were cleaning the floor, but they were not allowed to eat there. Black people in white hospitals, even a black doctor was not allowed to work in a white hospital. And a black nurse, even if they had exactly the same training as a white person, were not allowed to work in a white hospital. The only black people were there were the people that cleaned the floors and took out the garbage. It was reserved for the first-class citizens. And here in Canada, we now have the same thing. We have medical apartheid, where we have 2 classes of people. Those that are allowed into the restaurants and the cinemas and the sports events because they've now got a pass. And when you speak to the people who have come from the Soviet Union or communist China or who lived under the Nazis in Germany, where people would come to them and say, show me your papers. And if you did not have the paper that authorized you to be there, away you'd go. What has happened to this country? We need to realize that we are all now enslaved by these people who claim to be keeping us safe. And the government now controls what you do, where you go, and for how long. And all of these people who think that they have bought their freedom with this 2 shots in the arm are now enslaved because they will be due for a booster. And if they don't show up for their booster, suddenly they will magically become unvaccinated and will then be in COVID jail with the rest of us. Yesterday was my mother's 90th birthday. She lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she had been asking me if I was going to go there to celebrate her birthday with her. And I said, I cannot. I am in COVID jail. I am now a prisoner in Canada. I cannot leave this country because I have not paid my bail, which is 2 shots in the arm. That would let me out of jail for a little while. We need to realize that there is something very, very wrong with this picture. We have been enslaved, and we are now controlled by these people who claim to be keeping us safe, but who now control what we do, where we go, and for how long. So we are grateful for those truckers that are now driving to... We need more and more people to say no. We need more and more people to stand up and be counted, who will say enough is enough. This is supposed to be true north and free, not true north and enslaved. So this is your moment. What will you do? I leave that with you.
We want to encourage you in exercising your freedom and being non-compliant. None of us wear masks when we go into the hotels or other places. But Dr. Hoff and Dr. Malthouse have one really great story that you will enjoy as they engaged in their non-compliance.
Yeah, actually what I'm going to tell you, because part of what will you do, I'm going to tell you what I did in South Africa, even as a child, because I hated apartheid. It was absolutely insulting and dehumanizing to people to have different classes of citizens and to tell some people they can go into the restaurant or the cinema and other people you can't because you're a second or a third class citizen. When I was a child, I'll tell you that in South Africa, the black people and the people of mixed race in East Indian were allocated beaches that were just rocks and pebbles. And the white people got the beautiful sandy white beaches with lovely surf for surfing because we were the privileged class. And it troubled me greatly because it was so unjust. And so my siblings and I, even when we were 7 years old, used to go and befriend black children because they weren't allowed to live in white areas, but they were usually the children of black people who just worked there. They were allowed to be in white areas if they were working, but they were not allowed to live there. So we used to befriend these other children who were our age, and we would say to them, come to the beach with us. And of course we would go to these gorgeous white beaches knowing that these people were not allowed to be there because they were third-class citizens. And other people would come to us and say, these people are black. They're not allowed to be here. This is for whites. And we used to say to them, these are our friends. You leave them alone. And we as children would stand against those things. And in South Africa, Africa, we didn't have orange school buses that took people to school. When I came back from primary school, I had to get on a normal city bus. And because black people weren't allowed on white buses and white people weren't allowed on black buses, my way of trying to end this horrible injustice was that I wanted to go on black buses just to show them that I did not agree. And I would go and wait at the black bus stop because you couldn't even have the same bus stop because you can't, you might get contaminated. So anyway, I would go and stand at the black bus stop to wait for the black bus, and then I'd see the bus coming along and it would have it on the sign of the front of the bus. You either have whites or non-whites. That's what they were called. And non-white was everyone else. They had separate buses, I kid you not. On the trains, you could be on the same train but different passenger cars so that you didn't touch one another. And I would wait there, literally as a 7-year-old child waiting for that bus. And you'd see the driver kind of slow down and he'd look at me and he'd see I'm white and he'd just speed up and carry on. And so I would go to the bus stop when there were a bunch of black people there, because then it was definitely going to have to stop. And this was my way of trying to say no. So the story that carried, just to try and lighten things up. I'm sorry I've preached such a depressing message. I've spoken such a depressing message. But we live in desperate times. Dr. Malthouse and I were in Staples during the first part of our doctor's tour. We went in to get a couple of things, and we were just waiting to check out with what we were going to buy. And so the person in front of us who was just paying for her things was wearing this black mask. And we were not wearing masks because we know masks are pretty useless and very unhealthy. And so we were not wearing masks. And they're a symbol of oppression. And they increase fear. That's what they do. They are face diapers. So we were not wearing masks. So this person in front of us was checking out, and so Dr. Malthouse said to me, isn't it sad how depersonalizing a mask is? Because it literally covers most of your face. It literally depersonalizes you. It like takes away your identity. So this person overheard what he'd said, and she turned around and said to him, "Are you making fun of my mask?" So he said, "No, we were just commenting on how depersonalizing masks are." And then she said to us, "You're not even wearing a mask." So we said to her, "Well, they don't work." So she replied, "Do you realize that you were talking to a nurse?" So I replied, "Do you realize that you were talking to two doctors?" We need to find things to laugh about.
I have him tell that story. I have that story shared because, we do encounter, as we travel a lot, we're constantly challenging the narrative, we're challenging the orders. I'm going to ask Shelley or Elizabeth to hand out brochures. There is a package of brochures that you're going to get. And I'm going to ask for somebody to bring me up the red one, because I'm not sure where the red one goes. But you got the red one? Okay. Thank you, Stephen. That's okay. Yeah. So we'll give you guys each one of these, but at the table at the back, there's lots more. We want you to grab a supply of them and hand them out to your friends and family. So one of the things, as we work, and these tours are exhausting for us. We literally, every day, we took off we started at the Worldwide Rally in Vancouver on Saturday and have been nonstop every event, every night, travel. And there are a lot of people doing a lot of things, but the thing that we're going to ask you to do is to make sure that you bring along 10 more people, okay? Encourage your friends and family, because together with people power, we can make this end. You know, as we've done every single event starting on the island, all the various health authorities have been threatening us. And you know, and they threaten the poor people who are organizing these events. But what happens is we roll into town and they go, oh, Carrie, what are we going to do? We're going to have an event. Okay? We need to stand. We need to be brave. And you know what? We help anybody. If anybody came here tonight and find this church, our lawyers are ready to go to battle. Okay? We take full responsibility and authority for everything that goes on. And even though we've been threatened at every turn, and up north, they harass these poor people. As a matter of fact, one of the events, was it Smithers? We had to change venue that day because they finally folded on one side out of fear. We had to move 400 people to a new venue, okay? But we stood, we did it, no knocks on the door. Last night we go to leave the community center and one of these notices threatening us is taped to the outside of the door. So they were there, they didn't dare come in. And you know, we live stream everything. It's not like they don't know what we're saying and doing and they're going, oh dear, the messaging may promote vaccine hesitancy. And I'm like, you guys are the kings of vaccine hesitancy, I think. Everybody should be vaccine hesitant, you know? And you should be asking questions, and if they don't have the answers to your questions, you should be vaccine resistant. We need to do more. We will have questions in just a minute. We are the people. This is still a democracy. You know, I say COVID has done 3 things for us, right? Taught everybody how to Zoom. Before COVID, trust me, I had to spend 15 minutes teaching people how to mute their mics, okay? All right, maybe not everybody knows how to Zoom now because there's a lot of mute mics going on. All right, it has given us a democratic awakening because suddenly we realize that the people we either vote or don't vote for or don't show up to vote for have this enormous power over us. And we need to be involved. As much as we don't like politics, we have a democracy. We have the tools in our hands. We are both the problem and we are both the solution. Yeah. And lastly, we have become to know, thanks to COVID, that this nation is in crisis. And we don't have many more opportunities to save her, you guys. I have 16 grandkids, 17 on the way. I want them to have a future in a free and independent Canada.
Yeah.
That happen, but we have to stick together, be united. We have to get government back into its box because it's like this giant industry now that we pay for. So lots of work to do, but you know what? I can tell you personally, because I have met the tens of thousands of British Columbians as we've traveled this great adventure. There are good people in every community. And it is good. If they all want to put us in jail for not being vaccinated, that's going to be a good party, people. And I want to say those statistics, that Dr. Hoff talked about, your driver's license, whether you get medical treatment, that's propaganda speaking. Propaganda can be defeated, and the weapon is called truth.
Yeah.
So we are going to go to questions now. If you can line up to the side, maybe over right here. Please keep them concise and to the point. If you have a story, if it's good, we'll let you tell it.
Sorry. Did we go this way? No.
And just, direct your question. The doctors kind of know who is going to be the best one to answer it. And we'll get going right away.
First question, please.
Okay, the Novavax vaccine, what can you tell me about it and how
We'll answer the questions. We'll repeat the question because we only have one mic.
what do you know about the Novavax vaccine? Is it something that people can consider as an alternative to the inoculation?
Right. It's a good question. And the question was, what about the Novavax vaccine? It's not an mRNA or a DNA vector vaccine. What about that as an alternative? It's more like a traditional vaccine. But I would say based on the predatory behavior, the lies that we've had, plus what we've looked at in these vials and seeing that it's not just this mRNA and lipid combination, but there's nanotechnology in them, including graphene oxide and other things which we can't even identify. Based on this rollout and the attempt to go after our kids, would you trust anything from a pharmaceutical company this time? Would you allow them to reject anything to your arm, telling you that it may be just this or just that? These people are evil. They're after our kiddies, and they're out to kill them or enslave them. So no, I wouldn't suggest that you would have the Novavax. Next question, please.
Yeah, I'm a critical thinker and I've allowed my intuition to guide me, which is why I have not vaccinated and I'm here. But as I'm hearing you talk, this question just keeps repeating in my mind, like, you're all educated people and are connected globally with other, I'm sure, people that are believing the same things that you're finding and seeing the same science and making the same conclusion. But why would they inoculate 90%, 100% if they could have to injure them? Like, what is the purpose of injuring people with a vaccination? And then the ones that don't inoculate, incriminate them. Like, I don't understand the purpose.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand, isn't it?
It really is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know Michael Yeadon, who is, a past vice president of Pfizer, who makes one of the big vaccines, injections, COVID injections, and also one of their top scientists in the past. He examined these shots up and down and side to side. He couldn't figure out any other reason for giving them to kill a lot of people. He couldn't. And he called them a kill shot. So the next question is, so I guess you're a bit puzzled at that.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is they could not find any benefit for these shots. He couldn't see any reason for rolling them out. And we look just at for our children. Why would you give a shot to a 5 to 11-year-old? Doesn't make sense, does it? So there must be an ulterior motive.
So what's the agenda? Yeah, like, I mean, you've got colleagues all over the world that you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Is there no information that's been leaked through military, through other avenues to suggest what on earth is going on? Like, why?
There's quite a bit. Financial and control is really the key here.
Control to kill people? Population?
Yes, there's that. Hardly.
So, there's a good saying, actions speak louder than words. So at some point, we have to look at what the words are and is the result what the words are. And clearly, this is not about our health and well-being. This is about control, compliance, and cash, okay? Now, we get asked that question often, and I just see the perplexed look on your face, because you're a good person, and you probably do not understand motives other than keeping people on the wellness side. But, I'm going to refer to a letter I got back in 1997. Actually, this MLA is now Mayor in Nanaimo, and we were talking about a different issue, and he wrote this. I still have the letter. I should publish it. He said, these issues don't matter. What is the most important thing right now is overpopulation, and anybody who has 2 or more children somehow thinks they have a right to more of the planet's resources and access to things that other people won't get. This is not fair or right. Okay, that mindset is out there. But at the end of the day, what motivates all these people, and I don't think there's one general motivation. I think there's a lot of people being motivated by very, very different things. Many of it probably on the scale that involves, nefarious activity, or a different view of how the world should be and the world's resources used. what we have to look at is the reality. And the reality of what is happening is we are crippling our society. Why did we fire thousands of nurses, doctors, paramedics? We know we're already short on that because we want to disable and cripple communities. We want to I Zoom with these people. They are losing their homes.
And the other people though that have stayed, the other professionals that have stayed, the police, the paramedics, the nurses that have all got the vaccination. I'm hearing that the potential of the vaccination is going to cause these people that are working in those fields damage.
Oh,
They're going to get sick.
we're already seeing it.
So
And not only that, many of those people are angry because they were forced and coerced into getting it. That's why we're getting a lot of really good information about what's still happening in all the hospitals and things like that. These people said, I can't lose my home. I have children to feed. They subjected themselves to an experiment. Can you imagine? What country does that to its citizens? So we have to look at the reality, not what we want to see, not what we should see or what we've been led to see, but what is really, really happening. And as I say, I don't think there's just one grand scheme. I think there's a lot of different things at play here, right? So to give one concrete, but I do know this, we're fools if we don't look at the reality that's clearly laid out before us and make our decisions and our directions based on that reality.
Yep.
Yeah, I wish I could give you a different answer, but hey, we don't have the luxury of believing in illusions. Yeah.
One of the things you said, it's crossed my mind as well in the sense that we coming from working within a hospital, and now it seems like the mainstream media is saying Royal London Hospital has probably suffered one of the most short-staffed sort of crises across Canada, actually, or maybe BC, maybe it was who was Senate or something, but firing, letting go of staff when we're already super short-staffed, and I've experienced that for the last 10 years. And then talking about bringing back staff that have been vaccinated and are symptomatic, or they've been isolated for 5 days or something, coming back and working, but no mention of COVID recovered staff. I've had COVID, right? So I've got natural immunity, but it makes no sense that I can't come back. So then you have people who are getting sick in the community who have adverse events, and then there's no staff looking after them. That plays into, people not having the care and furthering that depopulation if people can't get care and they're sick. And, as well, talking about nanotechnology, and, a lot of people say, well, that stuff is conspiracy theory, or people could say that. I would tell everyone here, I don't know if you've seen it, but I saw this early on and was kind of gobsmacked that it was just in plain sight on the Canadian government's website. There was an article that said exploring biodigital convergence, the merging of humans with technology. And it's right there in plain sight.
Yeah, that doesn't make you feel
The question why takes you down a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we
Keep
have
going
to-
though, because
Yeah.
why don't we just
yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
okay.
Take a breather every so often.
Hi. Do you know of any statistics linked to stillbirth and miscarriages? And do you believe that this vaccine will affect fertility and reproduction and sterilize people?
Yes, actually we have. There are lots of different sources for that information. One that we saw today was from the US Senate. Oh, the question was, is the shot having an effect on pregnancy, stillbirths, miscarriages? And how will it affect fertility? Well, we had some concerns about fertility way back, but because there weren't animal studies being done, which is normal when you're bringing a drug to market, we weren't able to determine that. There was some theory that cross-reactivity between spike proteins, which are very similar to syncytin-1, would cause your own immune system to attack the placenta. So that would mean that you couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. The other one was, now we know that spike proteins accumulate in the ovaries, and which cause inflammation and clotting. And of course, you only, when you're born, you have all the eggs you're going to get. You can't make more. So if you damage the ovaries and damage the eggs, you're not getting any more. In some of the infertility clinics, they have noticed that when they harvest eggs from the ovary, that they're seeing a surprising number are abnormal, and they're seeing that as very, very peculiar. But today, I think it was today or yesterday, there was a Senate meeting where they announced that the statistics show that 3 times as many stillbirths and abortions are occur in people who've had the shot. So that's a pretty significant number. Yeah, and by that I mean spontaneous abortions. Sometimes they're called miscarriages. So spontaneous abortions, not therapeutic abortions.
All right, so you touched briefly on graphene oxide, and there was that doctor in Germany who was talking about graphene hydroxide and how that affects athletes and their performance, and when the blood race goes up. Do you find any validity in that study?
Well, he was actually someone who knew a lot about it, and he died shortly afterwards.
Yeah, he was
killed,
like,
he was
taken
beaten.
away
He was beaten.
during his live stream.
Yeah. Anyway, that's true. So graphene oxide or graphene hydroxide, they're kind of very similar. Now, graphene is a very flat. It's made out of carbon in a hexagonal shape. Creates these sheets, incredibly strong, way stronger than steel, and also conducts electricity. And they use it to tie things onto, so they can be carried into cells for chemotherapy. That was the original thoughts for using it. But because they're only 1 atom thick, they're very sharp. And we are seeing from multiple laboratories have confirmed that graphene oxide is in these shots. They're in the vials. We weren't told them yet. The trouble with that is that one is they have a propensity to cause clotting. Secondly, they're very sharp. And that's why I personally recommend, I think out in England the doctors are recommending that people, if they have the shot, they have a headache or a neurological problem, that they don't get an MRI of their head. But these are magnetics. I'm sure many of you have seen things sticking to people, cell phones sticking to them, magnets, coins. Even people who haven't had the shot, but have been exposed to people who have had the shot. So if these are magnetized, and you put the person into a big magnet like an MRI, you're going to be moving that micro shrapnel around. That could be very dangerous. So I think that there's stuff in these shots that we're just beginning to figure out. Some things we see on the microscope, we don't know what the heck it is. Some of them seem like organisms, and so they seem to some seem like little computer chips, which go shopping and connect to other ones. It's very strange, and you may not. I mean, it's really hard stretch to see that this is possible, but also that that anyone in this world will be doing it to our kids.
Big question. Yes.
Hey, I just have a question. I have a concern about how we can help people when the inevitable happens and the realization that they've been duped, emotionally what that does to a person, and then further that they may have these injuries. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about certain things that we can do to help someone who has a vaccine injury, to do with using hydroxychloroquine and the ivermectin and vitamin C and vitamin D. And recently I heard something about baths to detox with magnesium and salts and clay, but bentonite clay. Have you folks heard of anything to do with the practical side of that and then the emotional side?
Good question.
Got anything to say?
Really good question.
Yeah, so I think, so the question is firstly regarding how can we help people who are vaccine injured, both emotionally and physically. That's basically the summary of it. So I think probably the 3 most important things that a person can take if they have vaccine injuries, if they have symptoms. The first is ivermectin. Ivermectin, the fact that they have been so determined to stop people using ivermectin is very significant. That the fact that they are literally, I mean, they've targeted much more than hydroxychloroquine. Because ivermectin is like the perfect medication for the spike protein. I'll tell you how ivermectin works and why it works for preventing COVID, why it works in every stage of the disease, the viral phase, the inflammatory phase, and the clotting phase, and why it even works for vaccine injuries. Ivermectin works by binding the spike protein on the virus. And it also works by binding the ACE2 receptor in your respiratory mucous membranes. In other words, the way that virus gets into your body, you inhale the virus in air. As it lands on your mucous membranes, that's the surface of your airways, it has to find what's called an ACE2 receptor. This is what, it's like it's a little portal of entry. And the spike protein on the virus latches onto your H2 receptor and it then enters that cell where it can then start replicating. So what ivermectin does is it literally binds the spike protein on the virus and it binds to your ACE2 receptor, so it's literally blocking the door on both sides. And so because we know it helps vaccine injuries, and probably the way it does that because it is the same toxic thing in the virus as in the shot, the spikes. It is the spikes that are damaging your genes and causing gene deletions and causing the cancers. It is the spikes that cause the clots. It is the spikes that are the toxic part of this. I mean, of course, there are other things as well, like the graphene oxide. But the spikes are the biggest problem. And so ivermectin is the first thing you could use. The second thing is zinc. Zinc helps to break down some of the graphene oxide, but the ivermectin is also useful for the nanotechnology. Now this is getting a bit sci-fi, but literally these little ultra microscopic nano whatever they are in there that kind of piece together like a little robotic parasite are literally dissolved by ivermectin. And that may be why they are so determined that we do not use it. And the third thing that is a very good detox is NAC, N-acetylcholine. You can buy it at a health food store. And in fact, in the emergency room, that's what we use for rescuing people that have taken Tylenol overdoses. We give them intravenous NAC. And it literally detoxes that Tylenol, which will otherwise put them into liver failure. It literally neutralizes. And so it's very good for these toxic things that are in these shots. So on the back of this brochure, the brochure that's got the little baby on it, on the back of it at the bottom, you'll see a list of websites. So make sure you take one of those with you. It's the brochure with the baby on it. Those websites are really good websites that will give you information about treating COVID and how to treat vaccine injuries. So have a look at that. That is really important information so that you can look after yourself and your friends. But into the other part of your question was, how do we deal with the psychological part of this? Unfortunately, more and more people who believed the rhetoric of the public health people that this was going to keep them safe have now realized that it is not as safe as they thought. And they've now realized that it doesn't keep other people safe either, because people that get the jabs still get COVID, and they still spread COVID. So it's not doing any of the things that the public health authorities told us it would do. So those people need a lot of love and encouragement. As they wake up and realize that they have been deceived, we need to welcome them back into the fold. We need to... This nation has been divided. I mean, this nation of incredibly tolerant people, where a third of them don't even think you should be allowed to drive a car anymore because you refuse to have your clot shots? Really? These people need to realize that they have been bewitched. They have been brainwashed. They have been made into hateful and intolerant people. They have been changed by the narrative of fear. And we need to welcome them back. And we need to try and build one nation. Not a nation with first and second class citizens where you can go into the restaurant, but you can't.
Good answer. Thanks.
And the other thing is people saying, so what do I do? I've taken these shots. God gave us bodies that are fearfully and wonderfully made, that have the ability to heal themselves in a wonderful way. And so all we can do is, if we have symptoms, use those things that I mentioned, plus the other things that you'll find in those websites. People use pine needle tea, and they do a whole bunch of other things that are wonderful, and you'll see them listed there. But we need to realize that our bodies are able to heal. And just as a person who has been a smoker for 30 years, who finally comes to their senses, or has been a drinker for years, and finally comes to their senses and realizes that they've been doing terrible harm to themselves, the most important thing is to stop the harm. Just don't do it again. And let your body heal. And that's what we need to do.
I just wanted to say one thing, that you don't necessarily have to wait until you start having symptoms after getting the shot. The minute my kids, I had them on stuff before they were getting it, because I knew that they were going to, when they were without me, they weren't with me, but I started them on stuff immediately. Like I kept it going, because I wanted to try to mitigate what I could. So you don't have to wait until you're actually having symptoms to start things.
In fact, you can start before you go for your shot. By that I mean, I know you guys are probably not going for your shots, but some people have been using, for example, colchicine a week before their shot and a week afterwards to try to reduce spike protein inflammation and so forth. So it makes sense to anticipate. So if someone feels that they're forced to go get their shot because of their job, for example, then it's worthwhile for them to go on a regimen. And if you look at the World Council for Health, which has the website address on the back, that's a good place to see the different regimens for treating. So treat before you go for the shot, or tell your friends or whoever feels they have to.
You talked about trust in pharmaceuticals, trust in further inoculations. Can you guys comment on the components of informed consent? What should we be asking? What should people be talking to their kids about? What are the questions we should be asking? What are the components of informed consent? What are our rights?
All right, well, I'll start off and then I'll pass it on. But I mean, it's impossible for a 5 to 11-year-old to give informed consent. But in fact, it's impossible for an adult to give informed consent on a research product that we don't know the ingredients of. And those will have not been divulged to us until the end of the experiment. Some of them, like SM-102, which is made by King Chemicals, is already written up as being toxic for humans. It's experimental only, and it should not be applied to the skin or other parts of the body. And so we know there's a lot of stuff in these shots which are dangerous, as we know, but some of them are kind of secret formulas that they won't divulge in, of course, Health Canada and the FDA, they're not asking, right? But there are other things in there that we just have no idea, because we're in an experiment. So it's impossible to give informed consent for this shot.
That is a really good question. I just want to tell you about the components of informed consent. Because by law, you are not, a doctor is not allowed to do any medical treatment without informed consent. It is literally law. So what they are doing in these vaccination clinics is breaking the law. So I'll tell you what informed consent is. In fact, if you've ever had an operation, if you've ever had a hernia repair or a knee replacement or any kind of surgery, your doctor will sit down with you and they will go through the risks and they will go through the benefits and they will tell you what the alternatives are. And once you have heard the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives, then it's up to you to decide which of the alternatives you would like to have, if any. You may not want any. And then, by law, you are supposed to then be able to make a free decision without any form of coercion. In other words, they are not allowed to do anything to change your mind. Your body belongs to you. And no one else can tell you what you should, or I mean, they can advise you. They can say, look, like just as, if I have a patient who's a smoker, I will tell them what the risks are in the hope that they will change their habit and save their health. But as Dr. Malthouse said, when they tell you what the risks are, firstly, they don't tell you what the risks are, and you have no way of knowing because there are secret ingredients in these shots. These are called trade secrets. The fact that they are forcing people to have these shots that have secret ingredients is very sinister. Why are they secret? What are they hiding? You obviously can't give informed consent if you don't even know what's in it. And as Dr. Malthouse mentioned, there's no possible way that a child can give informed consent because they're not even going to understand what the issues are. So what they're doing is illegal because they are doing it without informed consent. And they are not giving you an alternative. The alternative is that you go into COVID jail and become a second-class citizen or lose your job. It seems that they are determined to impoverish anyone who will not comply. You lose your job. So that was a very good question, thank you.
So I get to answer a question that was asked of me, and that was, how can people donate and help the Doctors on Tour continue? There will be donation buckets at the back there. Please be generous. Nobody on this tour gets paid. Everything goes back into the tour to make sure you guys get those brochures you can hand out. And we just so appreciate with deep gratitude, the sponsorships, the generosity has just been amazing. If you want to donate online, you can go to frontlinecanada.ca. Doctors on Tour, you can dedicate donations. You'll see the various things that we're involved with, but the Doctors on Tour is clear and obvious. Click on that and it'll just take you through the easy steps to facilitate that donation. So thank you for that question.
Next question, please.
What hope is there for those who have to die?
What hope is there? Well, I'd say there's lots of hope because there's quite a few things you can do to treat. Now, the other thing is that we think maybe 20 to 40% of these shots have saline in them. So it's possible that one got a saline shot. So if you had no symptoms whatsoever, that's quite possible. But probably it's worthwhile if you've had the shot to start treating yourself as if you have had an active vial. Others look at some of the things on those websites and perhaps set out a regimen for yourself to keep you that for maybe 6 months or so. Okay, we'll know more. We're watching, trying to determine what's the best avenue. But no, it's not a question if you're going to kick the bucket because you had the shot. And in fact, one of the things that I know you will not find here, Dr. Hoffman mentioned, is that try to keep your Wi-Fi off. Don't wear headphones, okay, because you have electric current going across your brain, and you have something with graphene oxide, which is magnetic, will be drawn there and could cause damage. And don't sleep with your head up against the smart meter. Okay? So we should really be very, very conscious of electromagnetic forces, because this is the whole nanotechnology side of it, that you can switch something on and have a deleterious effect on people who've had the shot. And we do notice that a lot of 5G seem to be rolled out in many of the places when they had COVID itself. In those centers, there seemed to be 5G was turned on, so it could have been that also activated something in the virus itself. Okay? You're welcome.
You already answered my informed consent. So the ivermectin, there's from the feed store, there's a white box and a blue box.
And not the pink box or the yellow box?
There's a white box and a yellow box.
Do you know the names on them?
The gold one had paper or something. So is it just your basic
have to look to see what the ingredients are. But Charles can probably speak to this. Unless you'd like to.
So ivermectin, unfortunately the government is determined that we don't get it. So unfortunately they're forcing people to use veterinary products. I mean, that's really all we can resort to keep ourselves safe. So generally there are 3 forms that it comes in. It comes in a paste that apparently is apple flavored. I haven't tried it. It comes as a clear liquid, and that's what I used when I got COVID. I had the horse ivermectin. It works very well. So it's made by Alberta Veterinary Labs. That's AVL, and it tastes slightly bitter. It's very important to calculate the dose according to your body weight. And you'll find that the dosages, all of those websites that we gave you on the back of the pamphlet with the...
Is there kids in that one? Sorry, this is what was Is there kids dosages on one?
Yeah, no, you go according to body weight. So you just need a scale, and you just weigh yourself. So ivermectin, as I mentioned, it's been used on... It was discovered in 1975. It has been used on people for almost 40 years. It's been calculated that 4 billion doses have been administered over that space of time to every age group from literally 6 months old upwards. And to many pregnant people as well, because it was, in the third world, just everyone gets it once a year, just to deworm them all, or to relieve. So although there have been no specific studies on pregnancy, the fact that it's been used for so long with no sign of any injury makes us think that we don't know for sure, but it certainly appears to be safe. There's no kind of warning signs. There's no babies that are being deformed or anything else like that. So I mentioned this. It comes in 3 forms: the liquid, the paste, and it comes in an injectable form. So the injectable one you can just take orally as well. Yeah, and then also there's a 4th one, which is the one that you put on the skin, which is the one usually for cattle. And so you can put it on your skin, there's no problem. It gets absorbed right through your skin very well. Yeah.
So some people are concerned about using a horse ivermectin on themselves. They can put it on their skin, whether it's the paste or the cattle one or the horse one, and you can rub it in, it's absorbed across the skin. So that kind of helps. If you're going to take it orally, take it with a high-fat food. So some people will take the paste or the liquid and they'll mix it in with high-fat yogurt. It's another way of sneaking into the hospital and give it to your granny. And we actually have proof that it's very safe, because we have Dr. Hoff here on the stage, and he took equine ivermectin. And there's only one side effect we noticed. When we go to hotels, instead of going to his room, he goes out to the stable.
Minor detail.
Yeah, and he eats a lot of hay for breakfast. Other than that, it seems to be extremely safe.
Yeah.
Can I add while we're on that subject?
Yeah.
So, giving the equine ivermectin to children, how comfortable would you be with that? And then the second part would be, right on the box, it says not for animals for human consumption.
Yeah. They have to do that because in Canada you need a prescription for it. You don't need a prescription for your dog or your cat or your horse, but you need a prescription if you're a human. So they sort of have to do that because it's. So I should just mention. So firstly, 3/4 of children that get COVID don't even know they've got it. They have literally no symptoms at all. So there's very, very few children. For children getting COVID, it's like getting a cold. Honestly, I really doubt that they need anything.
My daughter got quite sick.
Did she get quite sick? Yeah, okay. Yeah, 12. So I mean, there are some people, and particularly if they're vitamin D deficient, who will get sick from COVID. But you just calculate it according to body weight. And so I was just going to mention one other thing. Some of the veterinary ivermectin comes mixed with another antiparasitic called praziquantel. So you need to so praziquantel is perfectly safe for humans. It's not used in Canada, but in South Africa where I did my medical training, we used it a lot for treating a disease called Bilharzia, which was a bit like the swimmer's itch that people sometimes get from swimming in a lake. The swimmer's itch in South Africa, literally the parasite that got into you from the water literally went into your bladder or your bowel and would give you blood in your stool or blood in your urine. And we treated it with praziquantel, which is often in Canada mixed with the ivermectin. So if you ate that, there's no harm. It's fine in humans, but you don't need it. So rather, if you're going to buy the ivermectin, choose one that is pure ivermectin. That's no other ingredients. You just look on the ingredients.
And you can also get it online.
Yeah.
Green Hawk is a good website that has it. It's much cheaper than buying for humans. And you get liquid there, and you get the paste, which goes by the name Bimectin, E-I-mectin. So that's it. And now, of course, we've been using penicillin and other human medicines on animals for some time. Without
They don't complain.
And the animals don't complain. Yeah, next question, please.
Yeah, I think Dr. Hall just answered my first question there regarding COVID-19 and common flu. Is there a difference, or what are the signs and symptoms, and what is the difference?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think you're looking for what differentiates it from. So, well, the question is, how do you differentiate between the ordinary flu and COVID? Is that right? And it's actually a clinical diagnosis because a PCR test is not accurate. So we can't differentiate, and that's the reason that they actually dumped the PCR test, because they couldn't differentiate between those two. In fact, it couldn't tell you anything. So it's a clinical diagnosis. And what we're seeing with COVID, in my experience, is this peculiar drop in their oxygen tension, like the amount of oxygen they have in their blood, which seems extraordinary and sometimes occurring in younger people. So there's that's kind of one of the ways that we're looking at it. We have other things like blue toes and stuff like that. But I'll pass it on to Dr. Hall. Do you have anything to add to that, Rachel?
No, just, I guess.
I'll throw in my second question.
Okay.
How are they actually testing for COVID-19 cases?
Well,
If COVID-19 and the flu are one and the same thing.
yeah.
Well, I was just actually just going to say when you asked that was it was interesting. I haven't been working in the hospital since September, but prior to that, I noticed in the summer we suddenly got at the bedsides of pre-surgical patients. There was a machine, and we were doing a rapid antigen test, which I hadn't heard about it. Just suddenly saw it. The rapid antigen test, the one that seems to be short, and then suddenly we have it, and now people are taking it home. But I didn't know about that, and I went and asked the nurse because the patient didn't really know. She said, "Oh, it was a test, and I hadn't seen it." And so the nurse said, "Oh yeah, we just got a whole bunch for the hospital." So everybody was being tested. It was a quick test, done in a few minutes, and
And what is this testing for? Sorry.
well, yeah, no. So just to further along. Suddenly, 3 weeks later, I was going to the bedsides and seeing that there was no more machine there anymore. And so I was asking patients whether they had been tested, and maybe they were using them in other parts of the hospital or something. And they said they hadn't been tested, and so I went to ask again, had to find out, kept going higher and higher and higher, who was making the decisions. But all the machines were pulled because they were that inaccurate. So we've gone from an inaccurate PCR test to a seemingly more inaccurate rapid antigen test. And I actually don't know what antigen they're actually testing for.
Yeah, so they're looking for an antigen from the virus, but and none of those tests are actually considered. They've not been. First of all, we know the PCR is at least 97% false positives. When you do have a positive case, you can't trust it, right? And when you have a positive rapid antigen test, they ask you to back it up with a positive PCR test. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. And none of them have been clinically verified. So we really go on clinical symptoms.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, but because they have chosen such an incredibly useless test to identify COVID, we will never know how many people have died of COVID, and we will never know how many people have even had COVID, because they used a completely useless test to identify it. So when they quote these millions and millions of people that have died of COVID, again, looking at the evidence and see if it's consistent. When we look at the total number of people that died in BC in 2019 and 2020, there's no difference with this pandemic. With the numbers that Dr. Malthouse showed you with the whole of Canada, you could see that the graph that went a little bit of an increase each year because we have an aging population, there was no change in the slope of the graph. So then what were all these thousands of people that are supposed to have died of COVID? Well, now that they've been doing autopsies on people who have died of COVID, they have found that 95% of people who on their death certificate was put COVID did not die of COVID. They died with a positive PCR test, but they did not die of COVID. But so the fact that they chose this grossly inaccurate test was part of exaggerating the crisis. It was part of the narrative of fear to prepare us for the shot. The shot was like the key to get out of COVID jail. But all it's done is put us out on bail. We're not out of jail.
One last question, sorry. Yes. So can we assume that health officials have replaced common flu term COVID-19?
Yeah, I think so. The fact that there's no flu anymore, it was astounding. I mean, previously, before this pandemic, usually about 8,000 people a year would die of COVID, of flu. 8,000 a year. Suddenly, when COVID appeared, there was no flu. It literally disappeared completely because they were all just tagged as COVID. And the symptoms are very similar, except that for some people, their oxygen level goes way lower with COVID than it would with the flu. And the clotting, of course, the clotting from the spike. That spike is very toxic. And the virus gave us a little taste of it, and then the shot gave us a whole meal.
So how valid is the argument that the vaccine actually, not the vaccine, but that medical treatment does actually lessen the symptoms of people that do get sick, as you know? Because this is always the argument when you
Great question.
Brilliant question. Okay, the question is, how good is the argument that this shot reduces severe illness? So the scientific research shows that it does not. In fact, because these shots damage your immune system, the evidence now is that the people that have had 2 or 3 shots get much more sick from COVID than if they had never had the shot, because they have a damaged immune system. So this is part of this lie that this is going to keep you safe. And in fact, there's a really good video that I would recommend to all of you to have a look at. It is called More Harm Than Good. I think it was put out by the CCCA. It's the Canadian COVID Critical Care Alliance. The CCCA, it's called More Harm Than Good. You need to look at that. It's about I think it's about a 20-minute, 40-minute, okay. But it literally looks at the scientific evidence from Pfizer that Pfizer hadn't really disclosed. It literally looks at the science of whether or not these shots actually reduce hospitalizations, if they reduce total number of deaths, and if they reduce severe illness. And they do not. And that is the best scientific thing to look at. It's called More Harm Than Good, and it's literally an analysis of the information from Pfizer that Pfizer had sort of hidden. And it's a scientific analysis of the 6 months out. You remember Pfizer only tested these things for a couple of months and then they rolled it out. Have a look at that. It is a really important video.
So could COVID actually, it can end up in long COVID, can it actually last for certain people a lifetime, with lifetime damage?
I don't think we have a lifetime yet from anyone who's had COVID.
That's true, but based on...
Yeah, long COVID. That's a good question.
Lung damage and such.
Yes, the question is, what about long COVID? In other words, that's when the person has residual symptoms that outlast the acute COVID disease. And it's quite possible in the elderly because if you have a lot of clots, for example, in your lungs, so it'll be individualized. Some people will have it, some people won't. I don't think we really know the true answers to that. Why some people didn't get it, why some people do get it, how long it is. I know there are some people that say it doesn't even exist, other people say it does exist. But I personally think it is a phenomenon. But also people who get the flu, some people have the flu, they're never well since they have it, right? It's the same. If you think about COVID and clotting as a mechanism of the illness, then that's something which is going to be harder to overcome and reverse.
So just there's one piece of information that somebody that I've also been following, Dr. Shankara Chetty. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's in South Africa, and now the latest interview I heard he had treated over 7,000 patients, and he's not had one long haul COVID, and he feels that it's inadequately treated COVID.
So ivermectin, all these
Prophylactic or
prophylactic measurements can actually reduce those.
well, properly treat, prophylactically do to prevent, but properly treating when you do get COVID, which doesn't seem to be happening too frequently in Canada.
So how good of a chance is that our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took actually the Saline instead of
Actually, if you watch the video when he and his wife had the shot, you see the way it was done. It was a retractable needle.
Boom, there it is.
You want to say anything further about that issue of
Yeah, so this is often the thing that people are told. They know the clot the shot doesn't stop you getting COVID, it doesn't stop you spreading COVID. But the whole thing is, well, I won't be as sick. And just ask those people to look at that video from the CCCA. That is the scientific evidence that is absolute nonsense.
But that is actually a little bit of a complicated video. Because you're going to have to watch the numbers very carefully. But if you look at other countries like Israel and so on, we see that the people in the hospitals are those that are vaccinated, and had the booster, and they're aiming for number 4. So it seems that, and we have reports from people in the hospitals there in Israel saying that, the sickest people in the hospital are actually the vaxxed. Then there's all this other issue, of course. So I think it's best to say, no, this is not true. Evidence from Israel shows that the vaxxed people are actually more sick. And in the UK, they found that you have an increased risk of being hospitalized by 75% if you've had 2 shots. So there's stuff out there. It's pretty hard to counter a lie like that, right? But it is, because it's a very simple lie, it kind of rings true, right? So it's really hard to counter that. But that and the fact we cannot prevent transmission, those are the 2 key arguments as to why the shot is not of any value.
And as far as Trudeau goes, isn't it interesting that 2 days ago, because he came in contact with somebody who tested positive, even though he is supposedly double jabbed and boosted all that, he has had to quarantine, just in their quarantine will just take him over the time that all the truckers are there.
Those truckers aren't leaving. But I think they know where he lives. Next question.
So if my workplace gives me the opportunity to do 2 or 3 rapid tests a week, do you think there's any problem in doing all those rapid tests a week after we have
Other than being illegal,
Yeah, that's illegal, it's true. But also it's kind of making you show your papers, right? So in other words, it's punishing you. No, except for it's an inaccurate test. Yeah. I can't actually speak about the rapid test. I know the PCR test, there is a risk of depositing nanotechnology in your nose. I'm not sure about the rapid test though.
Okay, just one other question. So we were going to order some ivermectin, but it was in a tablet form. And you just, that's okay?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
you just mentioned that.
No, it's hard to get the tablets.
That's
Most people
human
have
prescription.
tablets are good, yeah.
the people here, I saw these folks in 100 Mile last week, and I'm so pleased they came here to enlighten you folks. So I thank you very kindly. Another thing, horse dewormer is cut with pure water. Cattle dewormer is with alcohol. So if we can use it when it's colder temperatures. That's the reason.
Oh, that's
Okay.
We can, when you put it on their backs.
And I just want to interrupt to say that, the paste makes a very good hors d'oeuvre to serve to the guests.
The horses have never complained. Two other things. One, you were talking about smart meters. My father was a very well-educated electrician, and he said keep all smart meters away from anywhere that you speak. The other thing is there tomorrow at 11 o'clock there is a roll. It may not be a rolling convoy, but a bunch of truckers are getting together to make a little bit of a visual impression from the Bill Knorr to Tim Hortons at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Dog and Sons is also donating money.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
This weekend.
Yes. And my last thought.
Sons and dogs?
It's a restaurant.
Depends whether you want to drink before you have your son, your dog.
The other one is I was listening to a trucker today. They came across the border to join the convoy in Ontario, Manitoba, etc. And he went to show the QR code and the what do you call it? Border guard said, I don't need to see it. We've been tracking you coming.
Wow.
So think about what your phone is doing for you. Surveillance. And that cue card is also surveillance. So just think about what that phone is doing.
So on that topic, I'm just going to add, what we haven't seen happening as a result of the COVID, because we've all been looking at the numbers and those kinds of things, is the amount of government grants and attention and tracking that has been going on. Billions of dollars are now going to a program called Super Clusters, and this is under the guise of high-tech industry. But what Trudeau did is he gave close to $1 billion to a number of groups to create artificial intelligence platforms on passive surveillance, increasing surveillance on your computer screen, shops, airports. From that end, all the way over to creating smart underwear with sensors that report back to an artificial intelligence platform that's connected to the government. When you look at some of Bonnie Henry's work, I know, and it's called Skin. Yes. Even Bonnie Henry has a whole thing called white tracking, and we'll be exposing a lot of this. There's only so much time on these tours, but when we come back for the Glorious and Free, we'll be talking a lot about how to end government invasion into your lives on all fronts. But those QR codes have everything about you, and they get hacked. Your life is available to anybody who can hack into that. So this is about surveillance. It is about knowing who's doing what. This experiment has clearly shown the government who's going to comply and who isn't, who all the troublemakers are. But again, this is not consistent with living in a free and democratic society. So, and we have the power to change even all of these things. So thank you for raising that.
One other thing, 5G is as bad for you as Wi-Fi. That right there protects you.
What is that?
It's from Body Align. And my wife and I wear these, and it protects you from the negative aspects of 5G.
Yes, there are quite a few devices out there. I've been looking at them myself because we need to kind of get out a little ahead of this 5G turn on. And there's some that you can plug into your house. We have one called Safe Zone that was created by one of our doctors. And there's another one called Blue Shield. And then there are various wearable devices like that, and there are even small discs and so on. So we're kind of looking at them to see if we can get the scientific evidence to support their use, but it's a smart idea to think ahead because this is going to be a nanotechnology EMF sort of battle in the end, I think.
Thank you kindly. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. We're listening to those twice.
Hi. So I was just looking at the ingredients for the Moderna shot, and I came across an ingredient in there that is, to me, it looked just like a telltale.
Telltale.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you almost got me confused. Everybody, telltale 10 times fast.
I'm tired. I mean, I'm late. It's tired. Whatever. Sorry.
It is. Yeah.
Blah blah blah. Rewind. Start over. I was looking at the ingredients for the Moderna shots, and I saw an ingredient in there that actually I looked it up, and it said it's a preventative for heart attacks. And I thought, oh my goodness, this looks like a confession to me. Like, what are your thoughts on them putting this drug into the Moderna shot specifically? Because, like, I personally find that concerning when they're, administering that to, young people, and they're and they have almost like a counter drug just in case it goes wrong. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't remember the name, but I think it starts with TRI. Have you got it there, the name?
I was just looking it up here. It's from, excuse me, you have to forgive my pronunciation. Tromethamine hydrochloride.
Okay. This is actually to change the pH or the acidity of the blood, and that they're looking at that. That's one of the reasons it's used in people who have heart disease and so on. So has been used, and I believe it is in the Pfizer one already. But they added the children's one. So that makes them suspicious. So they want to prevent heart attacks or heart symptoms, inflammation of the heart in children. So that's one thing. Plus, a month before they rolled out the Pfizer vaccine, they okayed the use of novel anticoagulants, Pixaban, etc., in the use for children. We use those for people who have clotting. So it seems that they're trying to reduce the risk and also repair the onslaught of clots.
So you would agree with my suspicion?
It's an admittance there's a problem.
Yeah, okay. And then I have actually a couple of questions for you. So I was just wondering if you could just tell us how you are planning on making this. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this recalling initiative to change these laws?
Sure.
How you're planning on making this happen?
So currently, we have, through the work of a lot of the people that we work with the Canadian Voters Association, which is Frontline Canada. So we are spending a lot of time bringing like-minded people together at all the rallies, with all the freedom leaders and all those things, because what we have to do is have a database of people ready to go, okay? Initiative has been successful in BC before. It was done with the HST, but it required 6,000 volunteers, okay, because you have to sign petitions. So there's this window of opportunity once the petition is okay, that you get to get your volunteers, get them certified, get petitions signed. So we have to take into consideration every little detail, right from weather, because it would be very difficult to do something like this in the winter up north, to we can't do it in the summer because people are away. Well, they used to go away. It might be easier now to get that done. And you have so many days to get 40% of registered voter signatures from all the constituencies in BC. So all of those things are very strategically. We will be putting out what we need within each community. So, we already have great volunteers within all the various constituencies that we have here in BC. So organizing them, giving them exact guidelines on what to do, how to do it. Our lawyers are already preparing the questions for approval with Elections BC. Recall is a little bit different thing. We have to wait 18 months after the last election, and again, it's this narrow time of window that we have to get it done, X amount of signatures. So really mobilizing the communities. I'm declaring Williams Lake and all the other communities we've visited free zones. We have a whole package of information that goes out to your businesses. Like, are you tired of not making money? Are you, and most people are saying yeah. So, you know, giving everybody license, we give them letters on how to approach their council. And if their town council, mayor and council people don't help them, then by golly, we have a municipal election this October. And we are already looking and identifying candidates to raise up people who will protect freedom and liberty within each community across BC. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. We have an awesome team of people back at our head office that work continuously on this. So it's, but again, we're getting it done. And as I said, people with this nation is ready for a change. In 2001, I went on a little bit of a rampage back then when the NDP was doing all kinds of things in the schools that it shouldn't be and abusing our money as taxpayers. So, you know, back then though, we could hold really big meetings because we could use sports arenas and that kind of thing. We went up to Terrace, 800 people came out. But that election in 2001, because the people had said enough is enough, came out and voted, and we basically obliterated the NDP because people sent them a very clear message. You're overstepping your bounds as what we want for government. And we had over 70% voter turnout. They put me on the cover of the BC Report magazine as the most dangerous woman in BC for all the right reasons. But it was a real movement of people power. So we are doing that again. We're assisting people in Ontario through the Canadian Voters Association right now. They have a provincial election. We are trying to clean house because you guys, we don't get a second chance at this. It's now or never. Canada is in crises. Don't think it's going to get better unless we make it better.
Yep.
Okay?
Thank you. So just to kind of clarify, like if people want to participate in this recalling initiative,
yep.
How would they do that? Like just to clarify what you're saying, like you're going to local governments, like say you went to our mayor and you said, do you want to join this? And like,
so
I'm
for
trying
recall,
to understand, like, how
recall has nothing to do with your mayor. Recall has to do with all these people here and whether you like the government representation at the provincial level, if you like. If you don't, if we identify 5 or 6 areas where we want to recall an MLA, we can bring down the government because it would become a minority government. You just can't function unless we have that. So we're looking very strategically at what constituencies we are going to be going after. But then again, it'll probably be one that's close by. So we will need volunteers. And again, if you're on our list, you're going to know exactly what we're doing and if you want to help or not, be given the opportunity.
So was that
yeah, or just go to Frontline Canada and say, keep me informed. Yeah, even better than we don't have to put your name and all that information in. So frontlinecanada.ca, that'll keep you up to speed on all these good things that are happening.
And is that your vehicle for this petition?
For the recall, Frontline Canada it started off as a campaign to help, ironically, healthcare workers. So what happened is people were starting to be denied access to things because of their vaccination status. So one day we're at the office and I start getting these calls from university students. So this is 2 weeks before school starts. These kids are coming back to their universities trying to get their dorm keys, and we're getting all these calls, Carrie, they won't give us our dorm keys unless we give them our vaccination status and promise to follow all Bonnie Henry's orders that exist and all the ones to come. Like, who knows what that is going to happen next? You know, give me your right leg? Oh, sure, you know. So suddenly that day I had 30 students literally in my office. Rebel News came over and we went and had a few interviews in front of some universities. I mean, not being good. Can you imagine sending your 18-year-old daughter off to university for the first time across the country? She gets there. And the university says, no, you can't have your dorm keys and no meal vouchers, even though you've paid, $25,000 plus to send her there. So that was fun that we tackled that. We got our lawyers going on that, going right out of the university. But I handed back down pretty quick on that one. It was very interesting. Then, next thing, the paramedics started walking through the door. And then we were Zooming with 6 nurses one night, and then 300 the next night, and 600, and then thousands. Doctors, midwives, dentists. So we have a team of lawyers now that these are the other moving parts to what we do with the Canadian Voters Association, because we have very few things that we stand for, and that is freedom, democracy, government accountability, and most importantly, judicial accountability. But don't get me going at this hour, because I won't stop on that one. But so lots on the go.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us, may I ask you one more question?
And I wonder if maybe, just because it's very late, we're all tired, we're getting tired out, maybe you can speak to Carrie afterwards. Would that be okay?
Yeah, let's
Okay,
do
thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
So, I was just wondering what the numbers are right now when they tell us on the radio the ICU numbers. Because there was a point where they would say, 75% are unvaccinated, and now I barely know. Yeah, but they're not saying that now.
Okay, so I'll be quick on that. So as a result, as I said earlier, a lot of the people that are still working are doing so, and they're angry because they had to get double jabbed and boosted in some cases to keep their jobs. So as a result of that, I get a lot of really nice information in black and brown envelopes with no return addresses. And one of the interesting pieces of information I got was daily reports from Vancouver Coastal Health from July till October. And they used to, starting in July, keep track of how many people were being hospitalized who were vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And I'll be very quick on this. As we see, we move through September, suddenly the amount of vaccinated are rivaling, the unvaccinated. And then by mid-October, the vaccinated are taking up way more hospital beds than the unvaccinated, and then they stopped the reporting for that particular piece of information. But I also want to say, we have always been notoriously low as far as amount of ICU beds and all the rest of it. So when they say they're overcrowded, this goes back, you can read headlines in 2012 to 2018 saying we need more ICU. There's just not that many beds in British Columbia. So of course they're being taxed, but not always with people with COVID-related problems as well.
You want to say what
Yes.
you actually work there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I still get daily emails as being part of, I'm still considered on staff. And what the information that's actually going out to the public is not the information that I'm getting, and that I'm in contact with other people who I get their daily reports from Okanagan hospitals, and it's not accurate. We are, okay, so just to give you an example, I think it was yesterday, I didn't look at today's, I don't think, because I was driving, but yesterday our hospital was at 104% capacity, and we had 2 people in the ICU that were with COVID. We don't know if it was because of COVID or just an incidental PCR test. And I'm getting lots of calls from people in the community who are concerned because they have parents in ICU or people who've gone into hospital and then suddenly they get a positive PCR test and they're stuck in there. So I'm seeing a lot of that people there who have incidental positive COVID tests and the business with ICU overflowing. Working in the operating room, when the ICU overflows, we get the runoff in the recovery room, so it blocks the flow of the operating room. And that is a regular thing. It's a yearly thing. It happens seasonally, and that's just something that we have dealt with for years and years and years. It's just not something the public's ever known about.
So I wonder what you would say about this experience my mother had. She ended up supposedly getting pneumonia, COVID pneumonia. And she was taking vitamin D, she was taking hydrochloroquine, and she was taking some zinc and quercetin. But she got really sick anyway. She had started with a cold on Monday, and then it progressed, and then she had the difficulty breathing. So on Friday, she said, I gotta go in. So she had to go into the Abbotsford Hospital, and they of course said, well, this is COVID pneumonia. And she was, on the CVAC for a few days, miraculously pulled through. They told her afterwards, we didn't think you were gonna make it. But she's now having some weird symptoms post having had this. She did have a young man staying with her who had to get the Moderna vax. So did she really have COVID? Was it pneumonia? She had tuberculosis as a kid. What is happening to her
Pretty
now?
complicated. So the question is for people to hear is that your mother went into the hospital, into the ICU, and she was on a CPAP machine for increased oxygen, and she was quite sick. And I'm presuming that she didn't get the jabs.
Oh no, she's very anti-jab.
Okay, that's good. We just need to know the layout there. And then,
Almost Dr. Mercola.
sure. Oh, good for her. Good for her. Yeah. Well, what we're seeing is that that people do get sick, right? And those people do get COVID disease because it's a sort of a clinical disease, right? So people do get sick with that sort of a regimen, which is a do-it-yourself regimen that she was on, right? Vitamin D, vitamin C, quercetin or hydroxychloroquine.
She actually had her hydrochloroquine with her, so once she could, she was
Taking it, yeah. But some people do actually some people still continue on into the hospital and they're quite sick. And there are various reasons for that. One is it's a misdiagnosis. It could just be a bacterial pneumonia, but it also could be COVID, in which case then you have to use a more intensive treatment for them. Usually at day 5 to 8 now, when the doctor sees them, they actually start rolling out steroids, and in Italy they use anticoagulants like heparin injectable. So it's much more intensive. Yeah, it may not be enough, but I think that's mostly the thing. So you have to look at predispositions, diagnostic, labeling, or lots of different things.
So would she have the spike? Like, would the ivermectin potentially still help her?
That's a good question. Getting laid, there's something that's...
She'll suddenly just get weak, and then she'll fall.
Yeah, so the ivermectin does block those spikes like doxycycline doesn't. It works through a completely different mechanism, which is why you can use them both simultaneously. But one thing is clear, we know that with early treatment, literally 80% of people that would have ended up in hospital or died will never get there because they will be treated at home. So, but there's still 20% that are still very vulnerable and will still end up in the hospital or dying. But it's the early treatment is critical. And because COVID is a very serious disease for some people, you have to use multiple things. And so it's wonderful that she was using all the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
And if she hadn't, she would probably be dead.
She pulled through. Yeah, lots of curves. And could she have gotten it from shedding from the young man that got the vaccine?
Yeah, you can't get an infection from the shedding, but you get spikes. And so usually that causes clotting and bleeding and makes you feel not well, but I don't think it would make a person as sick as that.
No, she had full blown.
The only other thing is that she has a history of tuberculosis. She has a history of tuberculosis.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, so that predisposes people to erratic, traumatic diseases in the lung. They always seem to be, it's like a bucking bronco, they actually seem to be more dramatic. They suddenly go from 0 to 60 very fast because they have a matching genetic makeup that allows them to get TB.
But how would a doctor know that it's just pneumonia versus COVID pneumonia?
It looks
We
different
asked
on an
that.
X-ray.
Yeah, your chest X-ray or CT.
appearance is different. Yeah.
Okay.
So COVID pneumonia gives you kind of a ground glass appearance. A bacterial pneumonia gives you these patches of consolidation. They look different on an X-ray.
Okay, thank you.
Alright.
Good question.
Last question.
Can my doctor fire me for refusing to take the job?
Ethically, no. And in fact, you can contact the College of Physicians and Surgeons and put in a complaint. The doc does that. But the College of Physicians and Surgeons doesn't seem to, they seem to have gone completely off the what do you call it, off the ranch, the territory, the rails. Yeah, I mean, I think you may not get, I mean, there's been lots of complaints put in that just put underneath the carpet. They've got a carpet there that's like about 6 feet high, but they've loved it. All the complaints about Bonnie Henry, the college physicians that have been behaving unethically.
Can I, if that is that the case with you?
Not yet.
Okay.
I need a doctor.
All right, so I want you to give the contact information to Denise, who's sitting there. And I want, if it does happen, I want you to contact us because I will follow that case and see what the College of Physicians and Surgeons does with it, okay? Okay. All right. Oh, see, they're the non-compliance guys again, right? Don't worry, it never surprises us. There's always two of you. All right.
Go ahead.
I think she said she was waiting.
Oh, I just wanted to what do you say to your GP? Like, she's fighting me on everything. She's telling me I've got young people in the hospital. I've got people in people care. Like, it's so frustrating.
Don't argue with her.
Well, no, we want to sit there like, you're wrong. Like,
So I had a problem with my GP, and my GP came through training under me. And I had been feeding him information, articles, videos, interviews, and I kept saying, hey, you know, did you see this? Did you read what I took? Oh, no, I don't have time. He's got little kids. So, you know, I feel your frustration because physicians
you're
speaking to
wrong. Other countries are doing this. No, they're not. No, they're not. You're an idiot.
That's what you say to them, but then you run for it.
Yeah. No, ask them where they're getting their information
She
from.
says the College of Physicians says this. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Pfizer's coming out with treatment. No, there is treatment. No, there's not. Yes, there is. Like, it's just.
Get a new doctor. There is none on Wednesday.
That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough.
Here you guys are looking for a job.
Yeah.
So I have to tell one story. What was it last night? This woman, her husband was speaking. She was delivering a baby, and 26 times during her 10-hour delivery period, they asked her if she wanted the jab.
I know. She was in labor. She was delivering her own baby.
Yeah.
They kept coming in and asking her to get the jab.
Like it wasn't me, because I would have just.
It's unbelievable. I mean, that just does not make sense. It's good these people are actually like they're like have zombie minds.
Yeah.
They seem to be completely unhypnotized and they're just walking around. Yeah.
Depends on who we put in office.
Yeah. Well, next question, please.
Okay, quick question. So I had COVID really bad. I made it, but I got no help. So I've seen in the States there's doctors online that will help patients to get care. Is there anything like that in Canada?
Yes, there is actually. There are a few telehealth organizations, and one of them is with the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. Canadian COVID Care Alliance. It's actually on the brochure. All right. It's also where they have that video more harm than good. So if you go there, you can find it. I think it's called the ccth.ca. It's someplace where you connect with doctors. You have to pay for it, but it's a good resource.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Give one more big round of applause for these doctors. All right, thank you for spending the night with us. Yeah, it was fun. We will see you again. Not right now, but. Okay, so on the back of the orange brochure that looks like that.
These are some websites that you can take a look at.
Have her send me
Thank you very much, Williams Lake. We enjoy it.